anime autopsy here, and I need to have a conversation with you about the ancient kingdom, because I am genuinely concerned that we as a community have decided it's this unknowable cosmic riddle while completely ignoring the most important page in the entire series. Chapter 1, Page 1. We talk about the Void Century like it's a locked safe in Marie-et-Joie, and meanwhile, Oda is standing in Romance Dawn holding a giant neon sign that says, "Hey, read this again," and we just don't. Every week I see people posting these gigantic endgame threads, zooming in on egghead leaks, circling a background marine with a weird hat, and the caption is something along the lines of, "This proves the ancient kingdom was actually a space civilization," or "Oda just decided the name last year, he's cooking on the fly." And listen to me, I need you to take a breath, close Twitter and open Volume 1, because the name you're all trying to brute force from spoiler pics, Oda already told you. In Chapter 1, you just didn't have the right lens on when you read it. Here's the thing, this is not a vibes theory. This is not a "what if Joy Boy is secretly a time-traveling Luffy from Universe C fanfic pitch. What I'm going to walk you through is a structured argument about author intent, about how foreshadowing actually works when an ending is planned in advance, and about what happens when an author quietly builds their final war, their lost century, and their ancient kingdom into the very first chapter title they ever published. Meanwhile, the fandom behavior around this has been hilarious and a little tragic. You have fans who haven't reread Romance Dawn since they were 12, confidently explaining in 40 tweet threads that the ancient kingdom's name must be hidden in some egghead monitor UI because Oda loves hiding details in tech screens. This is fine. This is normal. We all grow up. We get jobs. We don't have time to comb through early arcs. But if your entire theory category is "I saw a blurry leak panel," and you've never really interrogated why Chapter 1 is called Romance Dawn in a series obsessed with the dawn of the world, that's a problem. And I say this with love. As someone who has spent an embarrassing percentage of my adult life staring at the same handful of Romance Dawn panels, zooming in on background signs and sound effects like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, I have sat there going, why is Oda using this exact phrasing? Why is dawn stapled to the word romance? Why does the story about the boy who will change the world start with a title that sounds suspiciously like the name of a lost era? Because if the ancient kingdom's true name has been sitting in front of us since page 1, then the way we talk about Oda's mystery writing is fundamentally wrong. It means this isn't a guy throwing darts at a board in Wano and retrofitting the Void Century around whatever sticks. It means he pre-wrote the answer, buried it in the opening chapter, and then spent 25 years daring us to notice. And that is what this entire video is gonna fix. We need to go back to Romance Dawn, read it as a deliberate historical document, and once you see what's actually printed there, you are never going to be able to unsee the ancient kingdom staring back at you. So, let's start where everyone stopped paying attention. Chapter 1. So, let's start where everyone stopped paying attention. Chapter 1. And right away, we have to talk about the thing that makes every ancient kingdom argument in this community completely insufferable. You know the script. One person goes, Oda planned everything from day one. He's a 5D chess god. Someone else fires back, no, he's just making it up, you pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time you spot the word dawn. And then both sides start throwing the word foreshadowing around, as if it means anything that makes my head feel tingly. Here's the thing. When you use foreshadowing for literally every coincidence, every reused word, every panel that happens to rhyme with something 700 chapters later, the word stops being useful. We can't actually ask, did he name the ancient kingdom in chapter 1? Because nobody agrees on what counts as intentional. One side calls everything planned. The other side calls everything cope. Both are wrong, and more importantly, both are boring. So yes, this is a 2+ hour video, I know. I can see the timestamp. I'm the clown who edited it. But I need you to understand why it has to be this long. Without slow, precise definitions, every theory about Romance Dawn and the Void Century just collapses into noise. It becomes a vibes contest. Whoever yells foreshadowing louder wins. That's not analysis. That's a shouting match at a convention food court. What we need to do is separate 3 completely different things the community keeps shoving into one bucket. First, actual foreshadowing. Moments where the author intentionally plants a detail early because they already know the payoff. Second, retrofitting. When the author takes something old and repurposes it later. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how a lot of good long-form writing survives serialization. And third, what I'm going to call Oda's pre-writing. The huge slab of Ancient Kingdom, Will of D, Laugh Tale, and Final War material he decided before Chapter 1 ever hit Weekly Shonen Jump. If we don't keep those categories separate, we can't meaningfully talk about whether Romance Dawn, the repeated talk of the dawn of the world, or the 800-year gap around the Void Century are clues, retrofits, or fragments of a pre-written answer. We just shout planned or made up and go home. So listen to me. I am not asking you to trust the vibe. I'm going to earn this. We're going chapter by chapter, from Romance Dawn to Egghead, and cross-referencing SBS answers, old Oda interviews, and publication history. When Kureha casually drops the Will of D centuries before we hear Professor Clover say Ancient Kingdom, we're going to check what year that chapter ran, what Oda was saying in print, and whether the pieces actually line up. And I'm warning you now, some of the beloved Oda is a 5D chess god talking points are going to get dismantled. Some of your favorite he planned this from day one examples are going in the retrofit bin. This might sting, but the end result is that he comes out looking more impressive, not less, because we'll be praising what he actually does in his storytelling, not the miracles we invented for him. Once we clean up the language, then we can finally go back to that first chapter and ask the real question. What exactly was already decided when Oda wrote the words Romance Dawn on that title page? So before we march back into chapter 1 and start screaming Ancient Kingdom at every panel, we need to do something very unsexy. We need to define terms. I know, you came here for galaxy brain theories and I'm handing you a glossary. But listen to me. If we don't clean this up, every cool coincidence turns into foreshadowing and the word stops meaning anything. Here's the thing. Foreshadowing, in the strict sense, is boringly specific. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally plants information early in a story because they already know the payoff and are deliberately preparing you for it. The key word there is intentionally, not this could be useful later, not fans might connect this someday. Intentional. You put the gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1 because you already wrote the scene in Act 3 where someone gets shot with that exact gun. General statement, concrete example. In One Piece terms, Laboon and Brook are foreshadowing. Oda has said he planned their connection together. Laboon isn't a random sad whale who later got patched into a skeleton musician's backstory. The promise, the 50 years, the musician crew, it's all one decision sliced into different chapters. That's pure foreshadowing. Set up now, pay off later. But the plan existed from the moment the setup hit the page. Which brings us to the second category. Retrofitting is when an author takes something they wrote earlier, often for a loose or different purpose, and later assigns it a sharper meaning. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long serials survive past year 3. You drop a mysterious scar with no spreadsheet attached, and 5 arcs later you decide, actually, that's from the time he fought God. Pattern interrupt. Your brain probably wants to boo here. Retcon. Fraud. But I need you to calm the pattern-seeking monkey that sees Jesus in toast and betrayal in every adjustment. Retrofitting can feel planned if it's done cleanly. A random vase on the shelf in chapter 10 that later turns out to be Grandma's ashes. If the tone supports it and the author sells the emotion, your brain will swear it was always meant to be there. Now, Oda absolutely uses both of those, but they still don't explain the weird, obsessive consistency around terms the community keeps tripping over. Dawn, sun, smile, romance. So I'm calling the third category pre-writing. Pre-writing is when an author knows the destination, knows the major mysteries, knows the emotional shape of the ending, before publication, but doesn't lock in every single plot function yet. With pre-writing, the room isn't just a mantelpiece, it's a prop warehouse. You walk in and there's a gun, sure, but also a room full of objects tagged sun, dawn, smile, romance, D. Oda doesn't necessarily know on day 1 which specific panel will reveal the ancient kingdom's name, but he knows the final picture he wants those words to form. So he keeps putting those props on stage, over and over. Across Romance Dawn, Logue Town, Drum, Robin's flashback, all the way to Egghead. This is why the rest of this video is going to keep hammering these 3 labels every time we touch a clue. Is this panel foreshadowing, retrofitting, or pre-writing? Because when I argue that Romance Dawn is not just a poetic title, but a pre-written name for the ancient kingdom itself, I'm not saying Oda guessed and got lucky. I'm saying he stocked the room on purpose. And once you see how he stocked it, Chapter 1 starts reading less like an opening act and more like a crime scene. In the next section, we're going to walk through it panel by panel and tag every prop he left on the floor. Which is exactly why we need to kill one very comforting myth before we go dusting for ancient kingdom fingerprints in Chapter 1. This whole Oda planned every detail from day 1 thing. It's a fairy tale. It's fan fiction about the author. And if you cling to it, you stop seeing the actual intentional craft that's on the page. Here's the thing. The workload alone makes omniscient 1,000 chapter planning physically impossible. Weekly, Oda is turning in around 19 pages. That's pencils, inks, backgrounds, dialogue, revisions. On top of that, he's in constant meetings with editors. He's responding to reader surveys. He's fighting to keep One Piece high enough in Jump's rankings to not get axed in year 1. You're not sitting in a cabin calmly mapping out void century geopolitics for 2035. You're in a factory, sprinting on a treadmill that eats your spine. Now add the mental side. I need you to imagine trying to perfectly script a 1,000-chapter lore Bible, politics, geography, bloodlines, ancient weapons, the exact name of a lost kingdom, before chapter 1, and then also draw and write it under weekly deadlines for decades. Human brains don't work that way. Memory doesn't work that way. Continuity doesn't work that way. Even if you had a giant binder on day 0, half of it would be obsolete by Arlong Park, because external pressure is relentless. Editors throw out suggestions. Hey, this side character is popular in the surveys. Keep them around. Hey, this arc is sagging. Can we shorten it? Real-world events creep in. Shueisha pushes for movies, cross-media promotion. Suddenly, a character you meant to kill is now a mascot, or a location you planned as a one-off gag becomes a franchise pillar. Whole perfect plans quietly die in those meetings. This is not a sin. This is normal. The problem is that the community keeps treating any change as proof that there was never a plan, and any consistency as proof that there was an all-knowing plan. No. There's a third category. There's a sturdy pre-written spine, and then there's decades of agile improvisation wrapped around it. And that's where retrofitting comes in. Retrofitting is not lazy. Retrofitting is not deceptive. Retrofitting is how almost every long-running manga survives. You take an old panel that was thematic or vague or just cool atmosphere, and you assign it sharper meaning once the long-term structure has settled. Oda is just unusually elegant at this, so it feels retroactively inevitable instead of patched. Listen to me. If you don't accept those industry realities, you end up treating Oda as a time-traveling god rather than a brutally overworked human who happens to be very good at pre-writing. You start crediting him with predicting every accidental symmetry, every reused silhouette, every background sun as divine foreshadowing. You turn into the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. The real magic is smaller and sharper. Certain phrases, the dawning of the world, romance dawn, the repeated obsession with dawn overthrowing a long night, those feel pre-written, not improvised. The will of D being threaded through an 800-year world government timeline. That smells intentional. And in the next section, when we go panel by panel through chapter 1, I'm going to show you where the planning stops, where the retrofitting starts, and where the ancient kingdom's real name has been quietly sitting the entire time. So before we start screaming that Oda hid the ancient kingdom's name on page 1, we need to do something extremely unsexy. We need to define terms, not vibes, not, this reminds me of that so it must be connected. Actual, classical foreshadowing, because if we don't, the community turns into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time the word dawn shows up. Here's the thing, foreshadowing is not a thing that appears early and then shows up again later. That's repetition. That's an echo. Foreshadowing, in the strict sense, is when an author intentionally plants information early in a story with a specific, planned payoff already in mind. Intentional. Planned. The setup is written because the payoff exists in the author's head right now. Not because future you will scroll back and circle it in red. So, basic example. Act 1. You show a gun on the wall, not in the background of panel 17 where only a YouTube freeze frame can see it. You cut to it. You mention it. No one has touched Granddad's rifle since the war. You let the character's voice crack. Maybe you hang on it for a beat too long, so the audience feels that tiny narrative question spin up. Why is that gun important? That question is the setup. Act 3. The house is under attack. The characters are cornered, and the only way out is that same rifle. When it fires, it doesn't just solve the physical problem. It answers the emotional question you raised in Act 1. That is foreshadowing. The gun existed to be fired. The author didn't decide in Chapter 80, oh, hey, there was a gun earlier. I'll use that now. They wrote the gun because they already knew the ending. Listen to me. That intent is the entire difference. Now blow that up to 1-piece scale. Instead of a gun, it is a word, a flag, a weird initial, an island name. The Will of D shows up long before we know anything about the Void Century, but it is framed as heavy. Characters pause. They react. The term sits there as a loaded rifle on the mantle, and 800 chapters later, when Clover, Robin and Ohara start tying D, the Ancient Kingdom, and the Lost Century together, you feel the shot go off. Most competent authors working anywhere near mystery territory do this constantly. This is not a sin. This is not a flex. This is normal. This is storytelling 101. You establish a place, a symbol, a phrase with weight before the audience understands why, because you, the author, already know what it will mean when the curtain finally drops. So, when we get to Romance Dawn, Dawn Island, the repeated obsession with Dawn of the World, I need you to hold them to that standard. Did Oda know what Dawn meant in his endgame? Or did he just enjoy the aesthetic and retrofit Ancient Kingdom lore onto it later? In the next section, when we go line by line through Chapter 1, that is the test. Is Dawn a gun on the wall, or just a cool poster in the background? So here's the uncomfortable answer to that gun versus poster question. A lot of the time, even the author doesn't know yet. And that's where retrofitting walks in. We need to define this properly, because the community throws this word around like it's a felony charge. Retrofitting is when an author looks back at something they already put on the page. A throwaway line about Dawn, a random island name on a map, a goofy character quirk, and only later decides, oh, that's important now. The element existed. It was not originally a loaded gun. Then the author comes back with a wrench and duct tape and turns it into a crucial piece of the engine. That's the category. That's the difference. And listen to me. This is not a sin. Retrofitting is not cheating. In a 25+ year weekly manga, it's survival. The real problem isn't, did the author always have a 4D chess master plan? The real problem is, does the retrofit feel organic, intentional in retrospect, emotionally truthful? If the answer is yes, this is fine. This is normal. This is literally how most long-form storytelling stays alive, instead of calcifying in Chapter 50. Here's the thing. A good retrofit creates the illusion of impossible planning. You read an egghead panel that echoes a composition from Romance Dawn, and your brain goes, he planned this in 1997. No, your brain is a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. What actually happened is that Oda, who has a terrifying memory and a room full of assistants, went, oh, if I frame this shot the same way, it'll feel destined. And he's right. Your emotional experience is, of course it was always this. The method behind it is much messier and much more human. Now, contrast what fans want with what creators need. Fans want to believe in pure foreshadowing, in everything being planned from day one, because that makes the story feel sacred, untouchable, smarter than us. Creators, on the other hand, desperately want flexibility. They want to test characters, see which dynamics land, respond when the community falls in love with some weirdo in the background, and quietly retire the stuff that doesn't work without detonating the whole plot. Pure, rigid pre-planning is a prison. Smart writing is a blueprint plus a toolbox. Pattern interrupt. If Oda never retrofitted anything, One Piece would probably be worse. Less responsive, less textured, less weird in the best way. Sanji's backstory details, the formalization of Haki, even how the Will of D has expanded in scope. Those live in the blurry border where pre-writing and retrofitting shake hands. So when we get to the Ancient Kingdom, I need you to keep your categories straight. Some hints are going to be genuine foreshadowing from a pre-written endgame. Some of the Egghead era panels that mirror early art or repeat Dawn of the World are almost certainly retrofits. And that doesn't make them cheap. It just means we'll label them honestly when we go through Chapter 1 next and start sorting which pieces were guns and which were posters that got promoted. And to prove that this poster promotion thing actually works, we need to walk into a different battlefield. A safer battlefield. One where the stakes are ninjas and goggles instead of ancient weapons and genocide. So, Naruto. Specifically, Tobi. You remember how this went. Tobi shows up as this goofy, I tripped over Deidara's clay masked Akatsuki guy, talking in baby talk, getting bullied by Zetsu. One eye hole, swirly mask, total comic relief. And then, years later, mask cracks, showering and zoom in, and boom, it's Obito, Kakashi's dead childhood friend. The community lost its mind. Kishimoto is a god of foreshadowing. He planned this from Chapter 1. Wake up, sheeple. On paper, the case sounds airtight. Tobi has a single eye. Obito lost one eye and died under a rock. Tobi knows way too much about Konoha, the Uchiha, the fourth. He throws out ominous lines about that day and the failure of the past. His name is an anagram. Fans stitched every panel into this tapestry of 4D chess, where every goofy pratfall was secretly trauma. Every vague line was intentional setup. Except, here's the thing. When you go to the author instead of the subreddit, the story changes. Kishimoto has been pretty open that he did not have every detail of Tobi's identity locked in when Tobi first appeared. In early production notes and interviews, he talks about juggling candidates. At one point, Tobi was going to be Madara for real. At another, a totally new character wearing the legend as a mask. Obito only solidified later when he realized he could weaponize Kakashi's backstory and make the war personal. The mask wasn't Chekhov's mask. It was a flexible placeholder. So what actually happened? Retrofitting. Kishimoto had a masked villain with one eye and a mysterious connection to Konoha. Very adaptable piece on the board. When he finally decided, okay, Tobi is Obito, he went back and started threading emotional logic through the existing material. He reframed earlier vague lines. He leaned on the single eye. He amped up the Kakashi parallels. He wrote flashbacks that made old panels feel inevitable. The payoff retroactively illuminates the setup, but the setup was not originally a precise, intentional Obito seed. And listen to me. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal. This is how most long serial storytelling survives more than 5 years without collapsing under its own law. An author leaves themselves escape hatches. They plant broad, reusable mysteries. Then, when the time comes, they pick one path and retrofit. The problem is that our community keeps pointing at that process and shouting, "Perfect foreshadowing." We erase the difference between intentionally planned from day one and smart reuse of earlier ambiguity. We turn every masked man into proof of prophetic genius. So if we can accept that Naruto's biggest twist lives in this retrofit category and still works emotionally, I need you to stop demanding that every ancient kingdom clue in One Piece be notarized in Oda's brain in 1997 to count. Because once you let go of that, we can finally talk about the third category. The scary one. The thing Oda actually does. Pre-writing. Pre-writing. I'm going to be honest with you. That's not a real academic term. You cannot walk into a university literature department, drop pre-writing on the table, and get tenure. I'm making this category up because the usual binary the community uses, either Oda planned everything from day one, or he's just freestyling and retrofitting, does not describe what is actually happening with the Void Century. The difference matters, because if you mislabel the trick, you misread the magic. Here's the thing. When I say pre-writing, I do not mean Oda knew every panel of chapter 1090 in 1997. I mean he sketched the silhouette of the ending before he hit publish. He knew the emotional tone, a joyful, cathartic dawn after an absurdly long night. He knew the central symbols, dawn, the sun, inherited will, and people laughing in the face of execution. He knew the broad conflict, an ancient kingdom crushed by the ancestors of the world government. The outline is there, but it's drawn in light. In this category, the exact plot function is flexible, but the motif is non-negotiable. That's the rule. The island can change. The character can change. The route can zigzag through East Blue, Skypiea, Wano, Egghead in whatever order the author needs. But Dawn has to matter in the final war. The sun has to matter to the D clan. Laughter has to matter to the ancient kingdom. Oda will bend arcs, timelines, and even power systems before he lets those core images fall out of the story. This is not a sin. This is normal. Let me give you an example you already know but probably haven't filed in the right category. Chapter 1 is called Romance Dawn, not Pirate Beginnings, not Luffy's Big Adventure. Romance Dawn. That phrase is so important to Oda he slaps it on multiple prototypes before One Piece even serializes. Then he names Luffy's home Dawn Island. Then, hundreds of chapters later, we get scholars and revolutionaries talking about the dawn of the world, in direct connection to the Void Century. At some point you stop being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and admit, this is intentional. Pattern interrupt. What if I told you that whether Dawn ended up centered on Wano, or on Marie-Joie, or on an ancient kingdom flashback island we haven't seen yet, doesn't matter. The motif is the fixed point. The map can move around it. So when we say the ancient kingdom's name is hidden in chapter 1, we're not claiming Oda carved a full proper noun in stone and never touched it again. We're saying it's a pre-written name, baked into the language, into the structure, into the way dawn and laughter and D keep orbiting each other from day one. Details can be refined, spellings can shift, but the wordplay, the joke, the vibe of that name, that's been sitting in the first chapter, waiting for you to reread it with the right lens. And to prove that, we need to go back to Romance Dawn and treat it not as a prologue, but as a crime scene. So we go back to the crime scene, and the first piece of evidence is literally stamped on the cover. Romance Dawn. Not pirate adventure, not Ocean Boy Begins. Romance Dawn. For a shonen battle manga that will eventually be about geopolitical genocide and slavery. Listen to me, that is a weird tonal choice. And it gets weirder when you realize Oda keeps reusing it. 2 one-shots, early prototypes, all wearing the same label. He's not just workshopping a cool phrase, he's stress-testing a structural concept. Romance Dawn is his folder name for the whole project. It's the tag he slaps on the story about the dawn. If you're an author who already knows your climax is the dawn of the world after an 800-year blackout, what are the odds that's a coincidence? Here's the thing. Fans will tell you Romance Dawn just means the romance of adventure at sunrise. This is fine. This is normal. That's the surface read. But structurally, romance is a genre term about idealized history, and dawn is a time of day term about endings of nights. Put them together, and you get the idealized memory of a lost morning. Tell me that doesn't sound suspiciously ancient kingdom shaped. Now go to page 1. Before Luffy even pops out of the barrel, the sea is framed as this mythic glowing expanse. The narration talks about the great age of pirates dawning, about a new era born from Roger's final words. We're being told, in big friendly letters, that the ocean itself is a stage where eras rise and fall, where one dawn replaces another. No void century vocabulary yet, but the scaffolding is already there. Cut to Shanks in the bar. He's laughing off insults, refusing to escalate, talking to this weird rubber kid about freedom and the sea. On paper, it's a goofy prologue. Underneath, it's a manifesto about inherited will. Shanks carries Roger's era. Luffy inherits Shanks' hat, and with it, that will. Nobody says Will of D yet, but the storytelling is already running that operating system. Pay attention to the way the sea gets talked about. It's something you conquer, sure, but also something you inherit through stories. Luffy's dream is framed in terms of reaching the end of the sea, a place that, in retrospect, we know is literally Laugh Tale, the grave marker of the ancient kingdom's defeat. The world is presented as already broken, already reorganized around a missing truth. And this kid in a barrel is the narrative virus that's going to reboot it. I need you to notice how often morning and dawn language clusters around big world era beats later. The dawn of the world, waiting for the day of the world's dawn, Wano's night ending. That's not random poetic seasoning. That's a planned category of foreshadowing that starts with a chapter title. So here's the question, and I'm asking it as a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast but also reads interviews. If Oda knew from the start that One Piece ends on a literal dawn and the restoration of a lost kingdom, is it really a stretch to read Romance Dawn as that kingdom's true name buried in plain sight? Or does it get way harder to deny once we track how that word behaves panel by panel, balloon by balloon, starting with the very next scene you've been reading wrong for 25 years? So let's actually zoom in on that next scene you've been reading wrong. Because the word that's been quietly screaming at you since page 1 is dawn. Luffy is from Dawn Island. The very first chapter is titled Romance Dawn. And centuries later, when people finally start whispering about the Void Century, they frame the endgame as the dawn of the world. That's not a vibe. That's a brand. I need you to sit with how specific that clustering is. Protagonist's birthplace, dawn. prototype title he reused multiple times before serialization. Romance Dawn, final promised state of the world after the fall of the world government. A New Dawn. These are three separate categories of storytelling information: geography, metatext, and future history lore. They all converge on the same word, pointed straight at the same mystery, and we're supposed to go, cool aesthetic. This is where the community turns into a pattern-seeking monkey that sees Jesus in toast and then somehow misses the billboard next to the toaster. Here's the thing. Oda's on record as an author who weaponizes names. Laughtale is not just a goofy island. It's the thesis statement for the entire treasure. Water 7 is a city literally defined by its relationship to water levels and shipbuilding, and its big mystery is a blueprint for an ancient weapon. Eni's lobby is the judicial island that has no night. The sun never sets. Justice never sleeps. He is telling you what these places mean with the label on the tin. So when he calls the East Blue backwater that births Joy Boy 2.0 Dawn Island, that's not just sounds cool. That's the same naming system. That's intentional. That's planned. And when he slaps Romance Dawn on the prototype, then again on Chapter 1, he's not just recycling a college draft. He's stapling the core concept of the story to the very first page. A romantic, adventurous dawn that once was and will be again. Which brings us to the actual problem. We keep assuming the ancient kingdom had a neat little proper noun. Atlantis, Shandora, whatever. But every in-world description we get is about its era and its ideals, not its passport name. A kingdom that once flourished. The people of the D. The dawn of the world. That sounds less like Kingdom of X and more like a phrase, a slogan, a mission statement. Something in the category of Romance Dawn rather than Alabaster. Listen to me. If Oda's favorite toy is embedding answers in place names and chapter titles, then Dawn Island plus Romance Dawn plus the dawn of the world is not three separate coincidences. It's one compound hint. It's the silhouette of a lost era whose name might literally be its promise of dawn. And if that sounds tinfoil to you, we need to talk about the one guy who almost said the name out loud. Because when you line Professor Clover's interrupted speech up against these dawn motifs, the outline that emerges is uncomfortable. Clover almost says the name, and then gets sniped by world government censorship. That's not subtle. That is the author standing up on the table and yelling, "This word is the problem." So, listen to me. Once you realize that, the little D floating around in people's names stops being a fun quirk and starts being a smoking gun. Track where that D shows up. Very early, long before Void Century charts and Poneglyph PowerPoints, Oda is already flagging it as ominous. We meet Goldie Roger in Chapter 1, but the D is just sitting there, unexplained, like a landmine. Then you get Monkey D. Luffy, Marshall D. Teach, Jaguar D. Saul. Different factions, different morals, same weird middle initial. And every time it comes up in dialogue, the tone shifts. People whisper it. They pause. They react as if you just mentioned a banned religion. Here's the thing. The story starts calling it out way before we have any framework to process it. Kureha on drum doesn't just drop Will of D for flavor. She frames it as a question the world government is actively afraid of. Robin, who literally studies the blank century, treats the letter as a historical keyword. And Clover, in that Ohara flashback, explicitly connects the erased kingdom, the century of silence, and the existence of a name that terrifies the 20 kings. Oda spaces those lines hundreds of chapters apart, so your brain never gets to hold them all at once. This is where the foreshadowing conversation in the community goes off the rails. Fans argue, maybe Oda just thought D sounded cool and figured it out later. No, this is not a sin to suggest. This is normal for most series, but it does not match the pattern here. The consistency of how characters react, the way the D is always adjacent to storms, executions, and inherited will speeches. That's not improv. That's pre-writing. Pre-writing means the author already knows what the D stands for in the Ancient Kingdom equation, but keeps the exact variable hidden, so he can write scenes where Kureha taunts the world government, or where Robin flinches at the letter without locking himself into the precise phonetics of the word. The category, this is tied to the lost enemy of the world government, is fixed. The surface explanation is flexible, and thematically, Oda will not shut up about Dawn. Romance Dawn in Chapter 1. The man who will bring the dawn of the world. The sun, the smiles, the inherited will that refuses to die even when the person does. The people with the D are the ones who laugh at the gallows and carry promises across centuries. They feel engineered to be the torchbearers of whatever the ancient kingdom stood for. So I need you to entertain one grounded, slightly cursed question. If the D is either the ruling family's name or their founding ideal, what if the letter isn't random at all? What if it's the initial of a word Oda has been printing in huge, bold font since Chapter 1? What if the D is literally Dawn? And that's why saying the full name out loud gets you killed. Because if that's true, then one more coincidence around the D stops being defensible. Because if that's true, then one more coincidence around the D stops being defensible, and we have to graduate from vibes to evidence. So before we start seeing Jesus in toast again, we need to run Void Century 101. Here's the thing, canon gives you a surprisingly tight box. The Void Century is not ancient times in the vague fantasy sense. It's a specific 100-year hole in recorded history, ending about 800 years ago. And the very moment that gap closes, the world government appears, fully formed, 20 kings shaking hands on their brand new global HOA. That overlap is not subtle. The 800-year lifespan of the world government is stapled directly onto the end of the missing century. So what happened in that gap? We are told explicitly that there was a single, powerful ancient kingdom. Not a vague coalition, one kingdom. It possessed technology advanced enough that Vegapunk, the smartest man in the world, looks at the stuff in Egghead and goes, yeah, this is basically that. This kingdom stood in opposition to the alliance of 20 other kingdoms, the same 20 royal lines whose descendants now sit atop Maria Joie. The winners become celestial dragons. The loser gets erased so hard historians aren't allowed to say its name without catching a buster call to the face. Professor Clover on Ohara walks you right up to the line. He reconstructs the conflict. A great kingdom, ideals encoded in poneglyphs, crushed by the 20. He says he's figured out the name. He starts to say it. The Gorosei panic and order him shot mid-syllable. That's not metaphor. That is the author drawing a giant neon arrow at the missing word and then ripping the speech bubble out of your hands. And notice the pattern. The poneglyphs themselves never state the name. They carry history, apologies, weapon blueprints, Joy Boys messages. But they dance around that one term. Robin, the only person who can read them, spends hundreds of chapters knowing more than anyone else. And even she never just says, "Oh yeah, the kingdom was called X." Dr. Kureha casually drops that the will of D will one day shake the world. But again, no proper noun. The text is structured so that everyone can talk around the kingdom, never through it. So, listen to me. Within that framework, Oda has handcuffed himself in a very specific, very intentional way. If the ancient kingdom's name is hiding in chapter 1, it cannot be some random cool word he pulls out in chapter 1200. It has to be compatible with everything. A kingdom whose ideals threatened authoritarian rule, whose enemies were the 20 founders, whose legacy survives as the will of D, whose technology matches Egghead, whose dream is tied to the dawn of the world. I need you to see what that means for foreshadowing. We're not in the fun headcanon category anymore. If we propose a name, it has to survive contact with every one of those constraints. This is not a sin. This is not me being a killjoy. This is how you test whether something was actually planned. Because once you accept that box, Chapter 1 stops being a cute prologue and starts reading like a crime scene. And the word dawn is written on the wall in blood. So now we can finally ask the dangerous question. If the name was on page 1, what exactly did Oda print? So if dawn is on the wall in blood, Ohara is the crime scene report. And Professor Clover is the guy who almost reads the killer's name out loud before the sniper pulls the trigger. You remember that flashback? Robin in the tree, the Buster call ship surrounding the island, the scholars in the burning library still arguing about books. Clover gets patched through to the Gorosei and just starts dropping lore bombs. He explains that by cross-referencing poneglyphs, they discovered evidence of a single, enormous civilization that stood against the 20 allied kingdoms. A great kingdom whose existence has been systematically erased, not just defeated, erased from history, from records, from language. And then we hit the moment. This is the panel everyone speedruns past to get to the explosions, but I need you to slow it down. Clover says they even found the kingdom's name. He starts to pronounce it. You can see his mouth forming the first syllable, and instantly, on the Gorosei's order, a marine shoots him in the chest mid-word. Not after the speech. Not after a confession. On the phoneme. On the sound. That is insane narrative precision. Here's the thing. If this were just a random fantasy proper noun, that reaction does not scan. You don't authorize instant assassination over Atlantis 2.0. The story is telling you that the name itself is dangerous. The sound pattern, the meaning embedded in the word, is ideologically explosive. It's not trivia, it's contraband. The name is treated as a banned substance the moment it hits the air. And Clover gives you the motive. He says this kingdom had advanced culture and ideals that clashed with the 20 kingdoms who would become the world government. He talks about an inherited will, about a people opposing global oppression, about a different future they were trying to protect. That's not just backstory. That's the mission statement of the Dawn of the World speeches we keep hearing from Dragon, from Kozuki, from random old doctors who have seen too much. Now go back to Chapter 1. Romance Dawn. The phrase Oda keeps reusing for prototypes, the phrase he explicitly ties to the dawn of a new era, the romantic age of pirates chasing freedom. Our community has spent years treating that as a cute author flourish. This is fine. This is normal. We all do the pattern-seeking monkey thing, where we see Jesus in toast and move on. Except when you line up Clover's description with that title, the category changes. We're not in fun aesthetic choice territory anymore. We're in censored historical term territory. A kingdom of inherited will, opposing oppression, dreaming of a new future for the world. A word that, when spoken, signals a coming dawn. If the true name literally encodes romantic dawn, suddenly Romance Dawn stops being a quirky banner and starts reading as the redacted name printed in plain sight. And if Oda was willing to put the erased name on page 1 under a coat of genre paint, then we need to ask an even worse question. What else from Ohara has been sitting in the logo the whole time? So when you stare at that logo and see Romance Dawn grinning back at you, there's a second name hiding in plain sight that we've all been mispronouncing for 20 years. Raftel. Or Laugh-Tale. Here's the thing. The community treated Raftel as this mysterious fantasy island word for ages because of early Romanizations. Then Oda walks into Stampede, taps the mic, and goes, No, it's Laugh-Tale. Not random syllables. A dad joke. The island where the world's laughing tale, the last story, finally gets told. That is not an aesthetic tweak. That is an author ripping the masking tape off a pun he planned from the start. And I need you to notice what category this falls into. This is not retrofitting a cool name onto an old concept. This is pre-written wordplay finally being spelled correctly. The same way Romance Dawn was always doing double duty as genre label and hidden proper noun, Laugh-Tale was always the punchline name, trapped under translation noise until Oda could personally kick the door in. Because Laugh-Tale is not just a place on a map, it's a timing device. It only works at the end of the joke. You don't call Chapter 1 Laugh-Tale. You call Chapter 1 Romance Dawn. Then you drag your readers through 1,000 chapters of censorship, war crimes, erased history, and smiling orphans. And then, at the moment the curtain finally comes up on the Void Century, you reveal, oh, by the way, the final island is literally called The Laughing Story. That's not a vibe, that's a thesis statement. The entire Void Century cover-up becomes a setup for a gag where the ancient kingdom's ideals are so absurdly earnest, so aggressively hopeful, that when you finally hear the full story, you don't weep in despair, you crack up in recognition. Oh, of course that's what they were trying to do. Now connect that to dawn. Because dawn in this story is not a poetic backdrop. It's a mechanical metaphor. Night is when you can't see the shape of the world. History is literally unreadable. Dawn is the one frame of the day where everything that was hidden by darkness becomes visible at once. Laugh-Tale is that moment in island form. It's the place where the sun comes up on the past, and every silhouette you've been squinting at since Logetown suddenly resolves into a clear outline. So if the ancient kingdom's true name encodes romantic dawn, the beginning of the light, then Laugh-Tale is the other bookend, the moment the story of that dawn is finally told. One is the spark, the other is the punchline. One names the era that was stolen, the other names the place where that theft is exposed and crucially laughed at. And listen to me, because this is where the pattern-seeking monkey brain kicks in and starts seeing Jesus in toast. But this is not a sin. This is normal. What if Romance Dawn and Laugh-Tale are not separate titles at all? What if they are the two halves of a single conceptual name for the ancient kingdom's age? the dawn that begins in romance and ends in laughter. And Oda has been making us chant the full phrase out loud in pieces for decades without ever admitting what we were actually saying. Because if that's true, then the next step is worse. If the era's name was split in half and stapled to the beginning and the end, where did he hide the kingdom's name itself? You're expecting some ancient Latin pun or a hidden anagram in a poneglyph. I need you to zoom out, because if Oda split the era's title across the cover and the destination, then the really evil move is this. He hid the ancient kingdom's entire philosophy in East Blue and told you it was just the tutorial. Here's the thing. East Blue is not a warm-up. East Blue is the series in miniature. Freedom versus oppression, inherited will, breaking unjust regimes. It's all there, just wearing clown makeup so fans shrug and go, early One Piece is goofy, this is fine. You meet an axe-handed marine, a fake butler, a fishman warlord, and you think you're clearing low-level mobs. You are actually beta testing the final war. Look at the villains. Morgan is world government cosplay, absolute authority, public statues, executing subordinates to protect his image. That's Eni's lobby and the Buster Call in Micro. Kuro weaponizes status and reputation, hiding behind the mask of a loyal servant while planning a massacre for insurance money. That is literally the Celestial Dragon's whole business model. And Arlong? Racial supremacy, territorial control, economic exploitation? He is a tiny, localized version of the Tenryubito ideology, just without the spacesuit. And what does Luffy do every time? He doesn't debate. He doesn't negotiate. He physically destroys the symbol of that authority. The Marine base, the mansion plan, Arlong Park's tower. That pattern is not random. That is the ancient kingdom's thesis statement in shonen form. Unjust systems do not get politely reformed. They get punched until the flag on top falls down. Now, watch the symbols. In Syrup Village, Usopp's lies and dreams refuse to die, even when reality is humiliating. That's inherited, Will 101. In Arlong Park, the sun is everywhere, burning on the map room, reflected in Nami's tattoo, hanging over the sea when Luffy walks in. Then, hundreds of chapters later, Fishman Island hands you Noah, Joy Boy's apology, and the literal sun pirates, and you realize that early sun imagery was not just aesthetic. It was a category of foreshadowing tied directly to the ancient kingdom's sun-worshipping allies. Pattern interrupt. Remember when Luffy defends Shanks' flag from Higuma's goons in Chapter 1 and you thought, cool, pirates have pride? No. Names and flags in this story are embodiments of will. When Luffy later defends Nami's tangerine and pinwheel flag, or when Robin clings to the name Ohara, Oda is drilling a rule into your skull. Erasing a name or a flag is attempted murder on a will. Now put that next to a government that literally erased a kingdom's name from history. This is why I keep hammering pre-writing. East Blue is Oda's sandbox where he tests the language he's going to use for the Void Century. Sun motifs that evolve into Nika. Dreams that never die becoming the will of D small-town tyrants rehearsing the choreography for Imu and the Gorosei. None of this is coincidence. It's the author quietly running simulations. Which means, if East Blue is the prototype for the ancient kingdom's fall and rebirth, then the next step is obvious. We need to go back to those goofy arcs and read them the way the poneglyphs are meant to be read, as fragments of a single planned sentence. So what happens when you actually line those fragments up? You run into the weird fossil at the bottom of One Piece, Romance Dawn. Not just the chapter, but the entire little family of one-shots that existed before the manga we know even started. Listen to me, because this is where the community usually faceplants. Most fans treat those prototypes as trivia. Oh yeah, early Luffy, funny bird, different grandpa, whatever. This is not a sin. This is normal. But if you're talking about intentional foreshadowing and pre-writing, you cannot ignore the drafts where the author is literally stress-testing his core ideas. Quick recap. There are multiple Romance Dawn one-shots. Same title, different worlds. One has Luffy living with his grandpa in a more fairy tale setting. One has a sky pirate. The tech level shifts. The side characters rotate. The tone is softer, more whimsical, almost a children's book about the sea. Then you open official chapter 1, and suddenly we're in a concrete East Blue port town. Shanks is there. The world feels harsher, funnier, meaner. So why does the phrase Romance Dawn survive the purge when so much else doesn't? Why is that the hill Oda chooses to die on? The title stays. Luffy's personality and dream stay. The romanticization of the sea stays. The sense that an old era is ending and a new one is starting absolutely stays. Everything around those pillars is negotiable. Those pillars are not. Here's the thing. When an author carries an element from prototype to serialization across multiple revisions, that element is not just cool branding. It's part of the pre-written skeleton. Luffy can swap grandpas, lose a random bird companion, move towns. That's flexible world building. But Romance Dawn as the label for the beginning. That's a non-negotiable thematic category. I need you to notice the pattern. The stuff that changes between versions is surface. Specific islands, minor lore bits, side character roles. The stuff that doesn't is metaphysical. Dawn, romance, inherited will, the sea as a stage for a new age. We're not pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in toast here. We're watching which beams Oda refuses to remove from the house. And when Oda, a man who has confirmed he knew the ending before Chapter 1, keeps stamping Romance Dawn on every proto-beginning of his story, that's not a disposable phrase. That's a thesis statement. It's foreshadowing in the purest sense, a title that points straight at the final image he already has in his head. So if Romance Dawn is the name of the beginning, what's the payoff? Dawn of what exactly? A new age, sure, but also the redawn of whatever the ancient kingdom represented before the Void Century blackout. The persistence of that title is strong evidence that the endgame isn't just defeating the world government, it's restoring a lost morning. Which means the next step is obvious. We need to crack that phrase open. What does romance mean in Oda's storytelling? What does dawn mean in his end-of-the-world vocabulary? And where has he been hiding that combo ever since Chapter 1 stopped using it on the surface? And before we do that, I need you to admit something with me on camera. We are pattern-seeking monkeys. Our brains are not optimized for careful literary analysis. Our brains are optimized for seeing a bush rustle once and going, "That's a tiger, I'm out." This is useful for survival. This is a problem for foreshadowing discourse. Because once you care about a long-running story, once you've sunk 1,000 chapters into One Piece, every cloud, every panel layout, every bird in the background starts to feel intentional. This is not a sin. This is normal. The community is built on that impulse. But here's the thing. If we don't put a leash on it, you end up seeing Jesus in toast and calling it ancient kingdom evidence. You know exactly what I mean. Someone screenshots a random circular window behind Luffy, adds 3 red arrows, and suddenly it's undeniable proof that the sun symbol was planned as a secret ancient kingdom sigil back in Orange Town. Or a character smiles once in a weird way and boom, Joy Boy parallel. The category of clue gets so bloated that it stops meaning anything. When everything is foreshadowing, nothing is. So I need you to, just for this video, raise the bar. Not every sun, not every circle, not every bird flying toward the horizon is an ancient kingdom glyph. Some of them are just drawings. Sometimes an author is filling space on a page. This is fine. Let's set a stricter standard. If we are going to say this panel is evidence Oda planned the ancient kingdom name in chapter 1, it has to clear 3 hurdles. First, repetition. The element needs to show up multiple times across arcs, not as a one-off coincidence. Second, thematic consistency. It has to plug directly into the story's core ideas: freedom, inherited will, the changing of eras, not just round shape go burr. Third, textual echo. At some point, the manga itself needs to nudge it, restate it, or frame it in a way that screams authorial intent rather than fan projection. Pattern interrupt. Under that standard, a shocking amount of popular evidence evaporates. Random sun doodles? Gone. One-panel background moons? Gone. Half the This Island maps secretly spells Raftel charts? Straight to the bin. But Dawn? Dawn survives. Dawn is repeated across arcs, from Romance Dawn in chapter 1 to the dawn of the world in Odin's flashback, to Pedro staking his life on the Straw Hats bring in a new morning. It is thematically welded to the end of an old era and the birth of a new one. And crucially, characters who know about the Void Century and the Ancient Kingdom keep using that word when they talk about the endgame. That is not Jesus in toast. That is an author circling a concept in red pen for 25 years. So as we dig into how Romance and Dawn might encode the Ancient Kingdom's actual name, I'm going to keep calling this out. When a connection is solid under those 3 tests, I'll say so. When it drifts into fun but flimsy headcanon, I'll flag it. We need to be able to tell the difference, or the whole argument collapses, which means the next move is obvious. Test romance on the same strict terms against Oda's own vocabulary for love, freedom, and adventure. So if romance is Oda's mission statement for the Ancient Kingdom, Alabasta is his proof of concept. It's the field test, the dry run for what it actually looks like when a kingdom is almost erased and history almost gets away with it. Let's pin down the surface story first, because the surface is already screaming Void Century. You have a once prosperous desert nation collapsing under drought, riots, and famine. The people turn on their own king. A secret organization, Baroque works, manufactures evidence, pulls strings in the shadows, and slowly nudges the country toward a narrative where Alabasta is a failed state that deserved to fall. That's not just a conflict. That's a tutorial on how to assassinate a kingdom's reputation before you assassinate the kingdom. Here's the thing. Crocodile doesn't just want power. He wants the story. He stages himself as the heroic protector while covertly engineering the chaos. He burns the evidence, silences witnesses, and weaponizes public opinion so that when he finally seizes the throne, History will record him as the savior of a broken land. Control the narrative, blame the victim, rewrite the record. That's the same three-step process Professor Clover describes when he talks about the 20 kingdoms wiping out a single powerful ancient kingdom and then founding the world government on its grave. Now zoom in on the Nefertari family. This is where the foreshadowing stops being subtle and starts feeling almost rude. They were one of the original 20 monarchs who created the world government, and the only ones who refused to move to Marie-Joie. So they're both co-founders of the regime that buried the ancient kingdom, and the weird cousins who stayed behind in the old house with all the skeletons in the closet. In writing terms, that's a liminal position, not fully world government, not fully rebel, standing right on the fault line of the void century. And what's under their country? A poneglyph. Not a random one either, the one that points to Pluton. Robin's interest in Alabasta is not a side quest. It's the first time the story explicitly ties the Straw Hat's adventure to the ancient weapons and the erased century. The author is basically waving a neon sign saying, "Hey, this desert coup, put it in the same folder as Joy Boy. If you're a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, this is where the toast starts talking back." I need you to notice how Crocodile's plan rhymes with the Void Century on a structural level. He uses a clandestine organization to destabilize a target from within. He fabricates a justification for intervention. He positions himself as the only rational solution to a crisis he secretly engineered. That is a small-scale simulation of what the 20 kingdoms did. Create a problem, erase the victim, then write the textbook. But here's the difference, and it matters for where Oda is steering the endgame. Alabasta survives. Vivi stands in that war-torn plaza, covered in dust and blood, and talks about the future of the country, about stopping the cycle of hatred, about a dawn that will eventually come to her people. Dawn again. The same word Oda keeps stapling to the ancient kingdom, to the D, to the dawn of the world. So is Alabasta a one-off political thriller, or is it a rehearsal? A controlled environment where Oda can test how a kingdom almost gets erased, and how it might claw its way back into the light. We need to sit with that, because the next arc on the map doesn't just echo the ancient kingdom, it starts climbing toward the sky. Skypiea is where a lot of the community quietly checks out and goes, "Fill a detour, goofy god, moving on." And listen to me, that is a crime scene. Because Skypiea is Oda taking the ancient kingdom, running it through a funhouse mirror and dangling it in front of you for 60 chapters while you're busy arguing about power levels. Here's the thing. Shandora is literally a lost city with a poneglyph in its heart, a giant bell in its spine, and a history of persecution because it guarded a forbidden stone the world government wanted erased. You don't get more on the nose than that. The Shandians are punished for protecting history. Their home is blasted into the sky. Their descendants are turned into hostile natives in someone else's holy land. This is not subtle. This is the beta test for what happened to the ancient kingdom. And Oda doesn't stop at Lost City. He weaponizes sun imagery. The Scypians and Shandians have wings. They live literally closer to the sun, on a sea of clouds. The bell sits at the highest point, a golden sun suspended in the sky, and when it rings, it sends both light and sound crashing down to the blue sea. That's not just cool staging, that's storytelling geometry. A civilization in the heavens trying to reach the people below with a signal across time and distance. I need you to notice what's actually written on that Poneglyph. Robin reads a message about Poseidon. Yes, but also about a promise. A previous researcher, probably Joy Boy's ally, carving into indestructible stone that they will carry on the will and guide someone in the future. This is where the ancient kingdom stops being a tragic backstory and becomes a planned project. The stones are not just lore drops. They are a communication network, a hard drive the world government can't smash, pre-written and scattered, so that one day someone can reconstruct the full picture. So Skypiea becomes a thematic echo, an advanced, spiritually rich civilization. Bells, dances, rituals, inherited oaths gets hijacked by a brutal, self-proclaimed god who falls from the sky and declares everyone else illegal. Enel is a one-man world government cosplay, monopolizing the sky, erasing inconvenient villages, nuking anyone who resists, then planning to abandon the world entirely. The difference is scale, not category. This is not a sin. This is not Oda repeating himself out of ideas. This is him running the ancient kingdom scenario in miniature to show you the pattern. And then we get to Dawn. When Luffy finally punches Enel through that cloud cover and rings the bell, that's not just a cool panel. That's a literal sunrise. The sun bell flashes, the sound bridges sky and sea, and a man in the blue sea, Cricket, gets proof that the lost city is real. A kingdom the world wrote off sends a message. We're still here. It's a tiny rehearsal for the day the ancient kingdom's full history rings out and wakes up the entire planet. Which means Skypiea isn't a detour at all. It's the dress rehearsal for the real show we're heading toward on the sea floor and at the final island. So if Skypiea is the dress rehearsal, Water 7 and Eni's lobby are the tech run. This is Oda rolling out the stage lights and saying, here is exactly how you erase a kingdom and make sure no one can ever prove it existed. And he does it with blueprints and shipwrights instead of moon ruins and fairy tales. Quick refresher so we're on the same page. We hit Water 7, the city of water, meet Galila, and immediately run into a paranoia about money, reputation and government contracts. Then the mask comes off. CP9 has been embedded here for years, hunting the blueprints to Pluton, an ancient weapon that can erase islands. Tom gets executed, Iceberg and Frankie get persecuted, and the government is so obsessed with controlling this one set of plans that they're willing to blow up an entire judicial island to get it back. That's not subtle. That's a tutorial. Because here's the thing. Tom is a Void Century cosplayer. He builds the Oro Jackson for Roger, then spends decades guarding Pluton's blueprints. He is a craftsman who carries forbidden knowledge, exactly the way the ancient kingdom's scientists and artisans must have carried the technology and history that ended up carved into poneglyphs. Tom's workshop is a lab from 900 years ago, just with more cola and fewer laser beams. And then you get the twist that everyone in the community hand waves as a cool character beat, but it's actually structural foreshadowing. The blueprints aren't just a recipe for destruction, they are a backup plan, a counterweight. If someone resurrects Pluton from the past, these plans can build a second Pluton to stop it. That is the same category of move as carving indestructible stone records to outlast a propaganda machine. One is a weapon against a weapon. The other is history against censorship. I need you to clock how insanely specific that is. The author doesn't just say, ancient weapon bad, government scared. He walks you through contingency planning, redundancy, version control for apocalyptic boats. When fans say Oda could always just decide the ancient kingdom did X or Y, Water 7 is him standing in the corner going, "No, I already decided how they think. Here's an example." Then Eni's lobby takes that mechanical blueprint and wraps it in language. Buster call. Total annihilation. The explicit line that if the government wins, no one will know what happened here. That is not just about Robin's trauma. That's a thesis about the Void Century. We've already seen this movie on Ohara, and we're going to see the director's cut when we finally watch the ancient kingdom fall. Pattern interrupt. This whole arc is a workplace drama about HR gone nuclear. A corrupt employer purges whistleblowers, burns the archives, and rewrites the company wiki so the problem never existed. This is not a sin. This is normal authoritarian procedure. And Oda is documenting it step by step so that when you hear the dawn of the world or stumble over some surviving name fragment, you already believe an entire civilization and its title could be scrubbed, while a few stubborn blueprints, poneglyphs, D names, a word like dawn, slip through the cracks. Which means by the time we reach the next big history dump, you're not asking, could they really erase a kingdom? You're asking the better question, what backup did those people leave that we still haven't noticed? And Fishman Island is where that backup stops being abstract and turns into a giant stone apology letter. We go down to the bottom of the sea, into this pastel bubble city, and what's waiting in the forest? A poneglyph that is not a riddle, not a coordinate, not a weapon manual. It's a dude from 800 years ago going, "Hey, sorry I failed you." That Joy Boy apology is so weird, it should instantly trip your author brain. This is not a sin. This is not normal world building. This is a planned confession from the Void Century. He's apologizing for one specific broken promise. He couldn't use Noah to bring Fishman Island's people to the surface. Not metaphorically, physically. The giant ark isn't a random fantasy prop. It is a literal elevator for an entire persecuted race. Joy Boy is saying, "I meant to deliver you to the sun, and I blew it." That's the content of the Poneglyph. The content is liberation logistics. And once you see that, you can't unsee how aggressively Oda bathes Fishman Island in sun imagery. The Sun Pirates brand burned over slave marks. Fisher Tiger's hatred of the surface, born from Marie-Joie. Shirahoshi staring up, dreaming of the day she'll see the real sun. The entire island stuck under a ceiling of water, living on artificial light, with a solid barrier of ocean literally between them and the sky. You don't need to be a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast to notice the motif. Here's the thing. The story doesn't just say, "Wouldn't it be nice if they saw the sun?" It gives you a prophecy. Madame Shiali, the we don't miss fortune teller, says Fishman Island will be destroyed when that man appears, and Neptune talks about the promised day when they'll move to the surface. The language around that move is explicit. It's framed as a dawn, a new era, the night of the deep sea ending when the island rises. That dawn phrasing is not confined to Fishman Island. It's the exact category of wording we've heard around the Void Century, the dawn of the world, and the inherited will of D. So when Joy Boy promises sun and fails, and Luffy inherits that promise, what you're seeing is not a cute parallel. You're seeing a handoff from the past agent of that ancient kingdom project to the present one. We don't have to say Joy Boy is the ancient kingdom, but his mission statement on that stone, break an oppressive system, move and oppress people, equalize who gets to see the sky, is indistinguishable from the goals we've been attributing to that lost civilization. At minimum, he's an ally running their playbook. And once Fishman Island pins Dawn to a concrete social outcome, everyone under the same sun, it becomes very hard to argue that Oda just thought the word sounded cool back in Romance Dawn. Dawn is the label for the world that Kingdom was trying to build, which means that prototype title, sitting there in Chapter 1, might not just be about Luffy's personal journey at all. Because if Fishman Island is the apology, the next clue is the punchline. Because if Fishman Island is the apology, the next clue is the punchline. And that punchline is Dressrosa. Listen to me. This arc is Oda taking the Ancient Kingdom problem, putting it in a blender with a telenovela, and serving it to you with a flaming umbrella on top. People get turned into toys. Their loved ones forget them instantly. The entire country's memory is being puppeteered by one devil fruit user in a frilly coat. That's not subtle. That's a tutorial. Here's the thing. The toy curse is not just a quirky horror gimmick. It's a mechanical demonstration of mass amnesia. You have soldiers, parents, lovers, an entire generation of rebels, physically present in the world, still walking around, still suffering, but the second they become toys, every bond, every shared history is erased from human recall. No one even notices the gap. Reality rewrites itself on the fly, and everyone shrugs and goes, "This is fine." Now zoom out. What is the void century if not that curse scaled to a planet? The Ancient Kingdom is Dressrosa's toy population. It existed. It had technology, culture, and ideology so threatening the 20 kingdoms had to dogpile it. But in the current era, it functionally doesn't exist because the world government has enforced the same rules Sugar uses. You are not allowed to remember. You are not allowed to even hold the category in your head. And Oda hammers that parallel through names. In Dressrosa, losing your human form means losing your name. Mr. Soldier, the toy housekeeper, the gladiator toy. Identities get reduced to roles. When the curse breaks, what's the first thing that happens? Chaos, yes, but also a roll call. People screaming each other's real names, parents remembering children, lovers re-recognizing each other. Regaining your name is framed as literal liberation. That is not a random emotional beat. That is a thesis about storytelling and history. So when we talk about the Ancient Kingdom's name being hidden, I need you to understand what Oda has already trained you to feel. In Dressrosa, the emotional climax is not just Doflamingo getting punched. It's the restoration of memory. It's the world being forced against its will to acknowledge who these people always were. Project that forward. The moment someone finally speaks the Ancient Kingdom's true name on panel, the story is telling you it should land with the same shock as the toys turning back into humans. And we need to talk about the royal swap. Dressrosa's backstory is literally a more just royal family, the Riku line, being overthrown, smeared as tyrants, and replaced by the Don Quixote clan, who then weaponized that fake history to justify their rule. This is not a sin. This is not lazy repetition. This is Oda running the world government origin story at island scale. 20 kingdoms overthrow one kingdom, then write the textbook. Doflamingo overthrows Riku, then writes the bedtime story. The community loves to meme Oda planned this 20 years ago. But Dressrosa is one of those arcs where that sarcasm boomerangs. The author is very intentionally rehearsing the emotional script he'll need for the Void Century reveal. He's showing you, in HD, how it feels when erased people come roaring back into narrative focus. So when I say the Ancient Kingdom's name is hidden in Chapter 1, I'm not just being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. I'm saying Oda has already demonstrated the punchline. The day that name returns to the world, the story itself has to snap, the way Dressrosa snapped when the toys broke their curse. Which raises the real question: where do you hide a forbidden name in a story everyone thinks they already understand? Where do you hide a forbidden name in a story everyone thinks they already understand? You don't just bury it in lore. You turn the entire map into a sentence the characters can't read yet. Enter the road Poneglyphs. 4 giant red stones, 4 coordinate points, and when you overlay them, you don't get a treasure map in the traditional sense. You get a single location. Laugh Tale. On paper, this looks like standard adventure writing. Collect the plot coupons, unlock the final dungeon, roll credits. But here's the thing. To gather those stones, the Straw Hats are forced to literally retrace the Ancient Kingdom's forgotten network of allies. That's not me galaxy braining. That's diegetic structure. The road in Road Poneglyph is not just spatial, it's historical. Every time the crew finds one, they're stepping onto a piece of the world that refused to play ball with the world government's censorship. Zoo is the easiest example to see this with because zoo is a joke concept played dead straight. A giant elephant that's been walking for 1,000 years, carrying a civilization on its back, wandering the seas with a road poneglyph in its stomach. Listen to me, that is a living hard drive. The mink tribe's entire culture is inherited memory. They know about the Kazuki. They know about the promised visitors. They know they are custodians of something they can't fully decode, but are obligated to protect. And sitting on that stone? Wano's fingerprints. The series quietly tells you the Kazuki clan didn't just discover poneglyphs, they carved them, at the Ancient Kingdom's request. That's insane. The persecuted language Robin studies in Ohara is not some random dead tongue. It's a commissioned operating system for a civilization that knew it was going to be erased and needed to distribute its backup across the globe. Now take Wano's isolation. For centuries, the country literally walls itself off, closes its borders, lets the rest of the world think it's irrelevant. To the in-universe historians, this is a problem of access. To us, from a writing perspective, it's a giant neon sign that says, "This is where the original contract happened. The clan that made the stones, the country that shut down, the era that vanished. Same cluster. Here's where we need to zoom out." Oda didn't just invent a fetch quest. He built a physical in-world version of what you and I are doing when we scroll through panels hunting for Dawn references. The road poneglyphs are pre-writing made literal. The author already knows where Laugh Tale is, already knows what the Ancient Kingdom stood for, so he encodes the path to that answer in 4 immovable slabs of text, and then spends 20 years watching fans argue about which island is most likely the final one. This is not a sin. This is not cheap game design. This is the story admitting that the end was fixed before page 1 and daring you to notice. When you, as a reader, line up Romance Dawn, Ohara, Zoo and Wano in your head, you're doing exactly what the Straw Hats do with those coordinates. You're overlaying scattered fragments of a decision that was already made. And if the map is pre-written, then the name at the destination had to be pre-written too. So the real question isn't where is Laughtail anymore, it's what word is waiting there that Oda has been quietly teaching you to read since chapter 1? And if the destination is a pre-written word, then we have to talk about the person whose entire job is making sure that word never gets spoken. Because the moment Oda lets you see the map, he also finally lets you see the hand that's been holding a lighter over it for 800 years. That's what the reverie is. On the surface, it's this fun political summit. Kings and queens from all over, Cobra being a dad, Dalton and Kureha walking into Mariejwa in their Sunday best. It feels almost sitcom. Then Oda walks you into the throne room, shows you the empty throne, and has the Gorosei swear that no one rules the world. Democratic oligarchy. Hooray. This is fine. And then a shadow walks in, sits on the empty throne, and every word you've heard about the world government snaps in half. Imu exists, which means the enemy of the ancient kingdom was never just 20 allied kingdoms. That's the PR version. The intentional foreshadowing is that those 20 crowns were always a front for one hidden sovereign. One person or one role maintaining an 800-year-long night over the world. When Clover says a single kingdom once stood against the world, the community heard 20 nations. Reverie quietly retcons your mental image without changing a single fact. There was always something above them. We just didn't have the camera angle. And listen to me. This is where the Lulusia incident stops being a cool flex and turns into a historical case study. Imu doesn't just bomb a country. Imu deletes a noun. A whole island is erased from the map, the records, and if the reaction shots are any indication, from official memory. That's not warfare. That's editing. That's the exact same category of crime that turned the ancient kingdom into a blank century, and its true name into a gunshot mid-sentence on Ohara. Here's the thing. The moment you see Lulusia vanish, Clover's execution stops being about one old man being nosy. It becomes procedure. Someone gets close to pronouncing the forbidden word. You kill the speaker. You burn the books. You sink the island. You do it to Ohara. You do it to Lulusia. You did it once to the ancient kingdom itself. This is not a sin of sloppy writing. This is planned, systemic storytelling about censorship as a weapon. So when Dragon and the Revolutionary Army talk about bringing the dawn, they're not just being poetic. They are, very literally, trying to end an 800-year editorial blackout maintained by the Celestial Dragons and their invisible boss. Dawn becomes a technical term in Oda's vocabulary the moment the page stops being redacted. And Imu is anti-dawn made flesh. Whatever the ancient kingdom's name is, Imu's entire existence is about making sure your tongue never forms those syllables. That's why the will of D feels dangerous. Why Clover dies on the verge of a single word. Why the story flinches every time it brushes that missing name. Which raises a problem we need to stare at. If Imu is that committed to erasing one word, what happens to the story the second Luffy says it out loud? What happens is Egghead. The moment Oda finally stops coyly dancing around the Void Century and just puts the ancient kingdom's report card on the screen. Suddenly we're not guessing whether that lost civilization was advanced. We're staring at a sky-piercing robot that walked out of a sci-fi art book, a lab full of death lasers and holograms, and an old man in a turtleneck telling us straight up that the kingdom from 900 years ago was more advanced than anything on the planet right now. This isn't subtext. This is Vegapunk giving a PowerPoint, And the community did what the community always does when you hand us real information. We lost our minds and sprinted off a cliff. You get the giant robot silhouette in the flashback. Instantly, there are 20 videos titled Ancient Kingdom Name Finally Solved, all confidently zooming in on one background pattern on its chest. Vegapunk's research notes appear for 3 panels. Suddenly, every smudge of fake Latin on the screen is a Rosetta Stone. Somebody finds a half-translated text fragment on a low-res scan, and by the next morning, that fragment has turned into a 12-minute manifesto about how the kingdom was secretly called Dawnfalia, or Solaria, or whatever sounds vaguely poetic. Listen to me. This is not a sin. This is normal. We are all pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. And when Oda draws a circle on a wall on Egghead, half of us start tracing the letters ROMANCEDAWN into it. But here's the thing. Treating every Egghead visual as a cipher is actually the opposite of how Oda has been doing his foreshadowing. It's treating chapter 1070 as the origin point, when the writing has been quietly laying track from Romance Dawn, Ohara, Skypiea, Fishman Island, all the way forward. Egghead isn't the hidden answer key. Egghead is the teacher walking over and saying, yes, the test was rigged from day one. Think about what Vegapunk actually confirms. The ancient kingdom wasn't just strong, it was systematically erased. Its technology outclassed the present to such a degree that the world government has spent 800 years trying to keep humanity from ever reaching that level again. That's not a fun trivia detail. That's an admission that the cover-up is so massive it warps the entire shape of history, science, even language. Once you accept that, every early mention of a dawn of the world, every time someone talks about the sea waiting for a new morning, stops being poetic fluff and starts being contraband. The word dawn itself turns into a suspicious object the censors somehow missed. So instead of chasing every micro detail on Egghead, pixel peeping every monitor in Vegapunk's lab, I need you to zoom out with me. We need to treat Egghead not as the place where Oda finally drops the name, but as the arc that locks in the interpretation of Chapter 1's Romance Dawn as intentional pre-writing. In the next section, I'm going to show you how those first pages read completely differently once you put Egghead's confession on the table. So before we go back to passing panel borders in Chapter 1, we need to talk about the guy holding the pen. Because if you don't calibrate what Oda actually planned, you end up treating every cloud shape as foreshadowing, and every SBS joke as a gospel leak from the ancient kingdom. Here's the thing. Oda has been weirdly consistent for 20 plus years on one core claim. In early Jump interviews in SBS, in that famous "I already decided the last panel" comment, he keeps repeating that he knew the ending and the big mysteries before serialization. Void Century exists. A great war at the end exists. The dawn of the world exists. The nature of the treasure that makes people laugh exists. Those weren't discoveries in Chapter 500. Those were prerequisites for Chapter 1. But planned does not mean he had a 3,000-page Excel sheet with every island name and side character eyebrow. When he says he decided the ending, he's talking about emotional beats and thematic resolution. Luffy reaching a certain place. The tone of that final scene. The reason One Piece makes you laugh instead of cry. That category of thing. The skeleton is fixed, the organs are negotiable, and he admits this constantly. In SBS, He jokes about designing the supernovas in a rush because his editor wanted to spice up Sabaody. Kid, Law, the whole generation. Late additions. He has said characters grew more important than intended based on fan response. He has talked about cutting or merging islands when the schedule got tight. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how long-form manga survives 25 years without collapsing under its own law. So no, he is not a prisoner of some 1996 notebook. He's an author with a fixed destination and a flexible route. And that's exactly what I mean by pre-writing. The Ancient Kingdom, the Void Century, the Will of D, the Dawn and the Laugh at the end. Those are non-negotiables, whether we visit Thriller Bark or not on the way there. Negotiable. Pattern interrupt. Oda has literally told us he once considered ending One Piece in 5 years. 5 years. Same ending, just compressed. That only works if the core war, the Lost Kingdom, and the treasure's meaning were already on the table. You don't casually speedrun a mystery you're still making up. So when I tell you he probably chose Romance Dawn and Dawn Island intentionally, listen to me. I am not saying he had the Ancient Kingdom's exact spelling, font and logo locked in 1997. I'm saying he knew there was a forgotten kingdom tied to a dawn of the world, and he started hammering the word dawn into your skull from page 1 as an anchor. That makes it plausible, but not guaranteed, that the name itself is baked into those early choices, even if the final reveal stayed flexible. And in the next section, I need you to watch how those anchors line up, because once you map them, Romance Dawn stops being a cute prototype title and starts reading as the Ancient Kingdom's shadow on Chapter 1. So let's do the boring necessary work. We need to stop being the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and start doing a foreshadowing audit. If I'm going to claim the Ancient Kingdom's name is hiding in Romance Dawn, I have to show you which clues actually count. First checkbox on the list, the title Romance Dawn and Dawn Island itself. This is not a one-off pun. It's the prototype title, the chapter title, the island, the rhetoric about the dawn of the world. That's not random. But here's the thing. Does Oda know the exact final sentence about the Ancient Kingdom when he writes Chapter 1? Probably not. What he does have is a thematic anchor, Dawn as the reawakening of a lost era. That puts Romance Dawn in the pre-writing category. It's an intentional North Star with the exact payoff left flexible. Next, the initial D. This one feels different. From early on, D is treated as a loaded gun. Named characters react. Kureha drops the Will of D line long before we're in Void Century territory. That consistency, the way D is always framed as a hereditary, historical problem the world government fears, screams, genuine long-term foreshadowing. Not just people with D are important, but this letter is the scar tissue of a specific erased faction. The details can evolve, but the core mystery is clearly planned. Ohara's research and Clover's almost speech about a once mighty kingdom are in the same bucket. That scene is too structurally central to be a retrofit. Oda withholds one noun, the kingdom's name, and builds an entire massacre around that censorship. That is textbook foreshadowing. He knows that missing word matters, he just isn't cashing it in yet. Shandora's Poneglyph and Joy Boy's apology. This is where the community overcorrects. The emotional beat of an apology to a forgotten ally fits beautifully with the Ancient Kingdom idea. But do I think Oda had the full Joy Boy Laugh Tail Nika constellation locked at Scipia? Number. This is pre-writing plus later refinement. The existence of an ancient promise is planned. The exact shape of Gear 5 is not. That's healthy retrofitting sitting on top of a pre-written chassis. This is not a sin. This is normal. Road poneglyphs and the red stones feel more retrofitty. Early poneglyphs are about history and weapons. Navigation to the final island comes later, once the story needs a concrete endgame route. Elegant? Yes. Pre-written in detail? I doubt it. Imu and the Empty Throne are almost pure retrofit. The symbol of no single king was there as world government propaganda, but the Shadow Monarch shows up 1,000 chapters in. That's Oda weaponizing his own old imagery. And through all of that, the phrases that keep repeating are Dawn of the World, D, and that censored kingdom. Which means if the name is hidden anywhere, it has to sit where those three threads quietly intersect. And in the next section, I'm going to start pulling on that knot until it snaps. So here's where I need you to stop treating Dawn as just a pretty word Oda likes to throw on posters. Run the trail with me. Chapter 1 is Romance Dawn, not Romance Beginning, not Romance Prologue. Dawn. That same phrase is stamped on his pre-serialization prototypes, so it's not a random marketing flourish, it's the label he used when he first packaged the core idea of One Piece. Then your main character? Born on Dawn Island, the dude who will drag the world into the final war literally crawls out of a place named after sunrise. Then, hundreds of chapters later, when we finally get scholars and prophets talking about the Void Century, the phrase that keeps slipping out is the dawn of the world. And Fishman Island is over here running a full-blown religion on the coming new dawn. That's not one poetic metaphor, that's a brand. That's Coca-Cola levels of repetition. Here's the thing. In fiction, when a word survives the prototypes, survives chapter 1, and then becomes the stock phrase for your endgame prophecy, it has graduated out of the theme category. It's now the logo. It's the shorthand the author uses internally for the project all these mysteries are orbiting. Fans keep waiting for some exotic fantasy noun to drop as the ancient kingdom's name. But Oda has basically been screaming, "It's the Dawn thing," for 25 years. So no, I don't think the final reveal is going to be, the kingdom was called Zyglobus. I think the name, functionally, is a phrase, Romance Dawn, Age of Dawn, Era of Dawn. A label for a political and philosophical project. A world where inherited will flows freely, where history isn't censored, where the sea is one connected stage instead of a fenced-off prison. That's the romance part, the adventure. Dawn is the operating system, and I can already hear the objection. Isn't that just thematic? Aren't you being a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast every time Oda draws a sunrise? This is not a sin. This is normal. But in a story about erased history, themes and names are the same currency. The problem for the world government isn't a specific syllable on a birth certificate. It's the concept those syllables point to. They're terrified of the idea of dawn. The idea that an old, defeated worldview could re-sunrise itself. When Kureha talks about the will of D ushering in a new era, when Fishman Island prays for the dawn that will end discrimination, when Roger laughs at a treasure that's really a punchline about the world being upside down, they're all pointing at the same branded project. The ancient kingdom is the company, dawn is the slogan. And if we accept Oda's pre-writing style, then yes, He effectively named that company in Chapter 1. He stamped Romance Dawn on the cover and dared you to realize you were holding the mission statement of a dead civilization. Which means the next step isn't what was the name. It's what was the product that made the world so afraid of sunrise in the first place. So if Dawn is the mission statement, what about all the other names you've seen in thumbnails and theory threads? I need you to admit something with me. This community is a bunch of pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and then write a 40-minute video essay about the bread. You've seen these. It clearly says X if you trace the cracks on the egghead iron giant. The zoom in 800% on this Poneglyph, that curve is obviously the katakana for Y. This decorative swirl on the Ohara globe spells out Zed if you squint and already believe it spells Zed. No spoilers, no leaks, just that whole category of theories that hinge on a single proper noun extracted from a blurry shape or a maybe translation of one panel. Here's the thing. That's not how Oda's pre-writing works. When Oda wants something foundational, he doesn't hide it in a JPEG artifact. He hides it in repetition, in themes, in slogans. Dawn, sun, morning, inherited will, liberation. Romance Dawn, in Chapter 1. The dawn of the world, in Robin's Law dumps. Nika as the sun god. The Revolutionary Army literally talking about bringing a new dawn. That's intentional foreshadowing behavior. Most of the popular "the name is actually Kingdom X" theories. They fail that test instantly. Do they show up across arcs? No. They show up once in one context, and then the theory has to drag the entire rest of the story over to that panel and go, see, if we reinterpret this line, and this symbol, and this SBS pun, it sort of fits. That's retrofitting plus pareidolia, not pre-written payoff. Pareidolia is powerful. Your brain is built to find faces in sockets and gods in toast. This is normal. This is fine. But when we're talking about an author who has demonstrably planned things from Romance Dawn to Egghead, we need to raise the bar. The question isn't, can I make this shape look like letters? It's, does this word behave like a motif the author has been quietly hammering for 25 years? Pattern interrupt. Imagine Oda actually did name the ancient kingdom after a random squiggle on a background wall and then never echoed that word ever again. Would that be good storytelling? Would that fit the guy who turned a goofy Laboon gag into a 50-year tragedy, or who seeded haki as mantra and then systematized it across the entire power scale? When you apply the standard we set earlier, cross-arc recurrence, thematic alignment with inherited will and liberation, and consistency with Oda's documented pre-writing habits, most of those one-panel proper noun theories just collapse. They require interpretive gymnastics. They require you to assume Oda is both hyper-planned and weirdly careless about his core mystery. And listen to me, this is not a sin. Playing "What if the kingdom was called ____ is fun. It's part of how fans engage with long-form writing. But if we're going to stand up and say, with our whole chest, Oda hid the name in Chapter 1, then the candidate has to act like a foundational motif. Dawn does. The others mostly don't. Which leaves one more problem. If the name is a slogan, then what was the product that made the world government spend 800 years trying to shut the curtains? So here's the thing. You don't build an 800-year censorship campaign to hide a product. You do that to hide a philosophy, an operating system for humanity. And in One Piece, Oda already gave that OS a name, inherited will. Inherited will, as Oda uses it, is brutally simple. People die, dreams don't, ideals don't. They jump hosts. They hitch a ride on whoever's standing nearby with a compatible heart and zero self-preservation instincts. The key word again is intentional. This isn't just, oh wow, themes reoccur, how poetic. This is the author designing a world where the main resource that can't be erased is conviction. Zoom in small scale first because we need to. Luffy is not just some random rubber gremlin with a cool hat. He is Shanks' will in motion. The hat, the bet it on this era speech, the whole I'm trusting my dream to you handoff in Romance Dawn, that's a literal relay race of ideology. Shanks doesn't just inspire him. He offloads a job. Luffy is unconsciously continuing a project that started before he was even born. Same category with Nami. Bellmare's entire life is one big, you are allowed to live and dream even when the world says you're property manifesto. Nami's maps aren't just cartography. They're Bellmare's fantasy of a world her girls could freely walk, scaled up to the whole planet. She doesn't wake up saying, "Ah yes, time to fulfill my inherited will subplot today." This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how real people carry their parents' unfinished business without ever putting it in those words. Robin is the most on-the-nose example. Ohara's research is erased, the island burned, the scholars killed. That should be game over, except the research isn't a stack of books. It's a question. What happened in the Void Century? You can burn paper, you cannot burn a question once it's lodged in a kid's brain. Robin sailing forward is the ancient kingdom's worst nightmare, a single surviving why. Now zoom back out. Those little human chains are a micro-foreshadowing of the macro chain, the will of D. The D carriers are walking hard drives for a dead kingdom's ideology. Joy Boy, the ancient kingdom, whatever you want to call that coalition. They lost the war, but their bet was that you can't permanently outlaw curiosity, freedom, and laughter. You can only delay them. And this is where Romance Dawn stops being a cute title and turns into a thesis statement. Romance here is not shipping wars. It's the romantic notion that ideals can outlive empires, that the story of a lost kingdom can still rewrite the world centuries later through nobodies in dinghies. Dawn is the moment those inherited ideals finally get enough bodies to push back the night. So when I say the ancient kingdom's true name is a slogan, this is what I mean. It's not just Dawn Kingdom in fancy Latin. It's a world order where inherited will is allowed to flourish instead of being stomped into an eternal midnight by a government that's terrified of grandchildren. Listen to me. When the manga finally speaks that name out loud, it's gonna hit because you already know what it means. You've been watching Shanks to Luffy, Bellmare to Nami, Ohara to Robin, Roger to Rayleigh to Oden to Luffy. You've been living inside the definition since chapter 1. The reveal won't explain the story. The story will retroactively explain why that one word was so dangerous. Which raises the real problem. If inherited will is the weapon, what exactly were they trying to fire it at? If inherited will is the weapon, then the ammo is stupidly obvious and the community keeps stepping over it. It's joy. It's the fact that in this world, people will not stop smiling, even when that smile is the most politically dangerous thing you can put on your face. Listen to me. Oda has been screaming this at you since panel 1. Luffy's whole character is a grin with a body attached. He's introduced in Romance Dawn with that carefree, toothy smile as he stabs himself in the face to prove his resolve. That's not just he's goofy. That's a visual thesis statement. Pain is real, scars are real, but the answer is still to bare your teeth at the world. Then you cut to Logtown, and Roger is executed with the same expression. Public death, public grin. The entire age of piracy is literally born from a man treating his own execution as a punchline. Now fold in Laugh Tale. Roger gets to the final island, hears the story, sees the treasure, and what happens? The crew bursts into laughter so hard they name the place after it. The last page of the world's greatest tragedy is a gag reel. That's not random tonal whiplash. That's intentional structural foreshadowing about what Joy Boy in the ancient kingdom were trying to do to history itself. And then Oda weaponizes it. Wano gives you the smile fruits, which are the most on-the-nose metaphor he's ever written. Factory-made artificial smiles that strip away genuine emotional freedom, forcing people to laugh through starvation and grief. You get villagers who can only giggle at funerals. That is joy turned into surveillance. That is the authoritarian project of the world government in micro. You can laugh, but only the way we tell you to, which is where Joy Boy comes in. The name is not subtle. Joy Boy is joy plus boy plus. Crucially, apology. He's the one who failed to deliver the dawn, failed to keep a promise to bring about a better world. So his very existence encodes the problem. Unchecked joy is not enough. You need the power and the timing to protect it, or it curdles into regret. Here's the thing. In One Piece, laughter is resistance. Luffy laughing in Impel Down, the slaves at Sabaody dancing once the chains break, the D-carriers smiling at death. In every oppressive context, the author frames genuine laughter as a refusal to submit to the script written by the 20 kingdoms. Which brings us back to structure. Romance dawn at the start, laugh tale at the end. Dawn is the promise of a new world. Laughter is the emotional texture of that world. Those two titles form a conceptual bracket around the ancient kingdom's vision of history. Oda is not going to cap that off with some random consonant salad fantasy name. I need you to see the category error the fandom keeps making. We keep hunting for Atlantis tier proper nouns when the writing has been drilling dawn, sun, smile, joy into your brain for 1,000 chapters. This is not a sin. Pattern seeking is normal. I am also a pattern seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. But when every major mystery term clusters around dawn and laughter, the intentional answer is probably in that semantic field. So if the ancient kingdom was built on joy and a promised dawn, what happens when you try to erase that with 800 years of enforced silence? You silence joy, you ban the sun, you scrub the word dawn out of history. And then, 800 years later, your protagonist's heart starts beating to a drum that literally calls itself liberation. Enter Nika. Luffy's fruit is not the Gomu Gomu no Mi. We now know it's the Hito Hito no Mi model, Nika, a human fruit, mythical model turning its user into the legendary sun god of liberation and joy. That's not me being a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast. That's the Gorosei spelling it out in a lore dump. Nika is a figure worshipped in whispers by slaves, a god whose very existence is a problem for the world government because his power is to free people and make them laugh while doing it. And Oda doesn't just tell you that. He draws it on your retinas. Nika's silhouette is all radiating curves and exaggerated bouncing motion, a literal walking sunburst. The drums of liberation are not subtle. The heartbeat gets its own onomatopoeia, its own rhythm that takes over the paneling. Luffy's hair and clothes turn white. His body turns rubbery in a cartoon way that breaks the world's physics, and everyone around him starts smiling even when they absolutely should not. The author is hardwiring joy and light into the transformation itself. Here's the thing. Nika's explicit job description, free the oppressed, break chains, bring joy to people in the darkest situations, is a one-to-one thematic overlap with everything we've inferred about the ancient kingdom. A civilization erased for standing against a global hegemony. A joy boy who failed to keep a promise to a people crushed by that defeat. An inherited will that keeps showing up in the bloodlines of those who topple tyrants. You can insist that's coincidence. This is fine. This is normal. But at some point, the sun god of liberation, existing in the same story as a suppressed dawn of the world, stops being a cute echo and starts being an intentional category. I need you to really sit with how on the nose this is. The government fears the dawn. The D are called the enemies of the gods. And the most dangerous power in the world turns out to be a sun god whose awakening is framed as the world's laughter returning. That's not just foreshadowing. That's Oda saying the quiet part almost out loud and then handing you a drum solo, which loops us right back to Romance Dawn, a story that starts with a boy smiling at execution, inheriting a straw hat tied to Joy Boy, and vowing to bring an age of freedom across the seas, now culminates in that same boy literally becoming the avatar of a sun god. The title wasn't an aesthetic flourish. It was the Ancient Kingdom's thesis statement wearing Chapter 1 cosplay. And if Dawn is the thesis, then the Ancient Kingdom's actual name? That's where the real pre-writing flex kicks in. So let's actually map this thing, because Oda planned it is a nice slogan, but a terrible argument. I need you to see the route, not vibes, a route. We start at Romance Dawn. Chapter 1. Dawn Island. A boy staring at the horizon while the narration hard codes the Great Age of Pirates and Dawn into the operating system of the story. At this point, Dawn is just aesthetic. A mood board. You read it, you move on. This is normal. Then we hit Ohara and Skypiea, and suddenly that mood board grows fangs. Ohara confirms there was a gigantic kingdom erased from history. The Void Century exists, and the world government is allergic to that information. Skypiea drops the Poneglyphs, the ancient weapons, and a stone literally engraved by the same family that will matter 1,000 chapters later. The category shifts. Dawn is no longer just poetic. It's sitting in the same narrative space as erased history. Fishman Island turns the screw again. Now we get Joy Boy, an apology to a princess, a prophecy about the dawn of the world, and a promise that someone from the surface will bring it. The word dawn is explicitly stapled to the Void Century, to Joy Boy, and to the future war. You go back to Romance Dawn in your head and realize, oh, that wasn't just a cool title. That was the mission statement of the Lost Kingdom wearing a straw hat. Zu and Wano are where the scaffolding becomes visible. Road poneglyphs appear. The Kozuki clan is revealed as the artisans who carved the stones, and their entire national tragedy is framed around waiting for the dawn that a pirate from the future will bring. This is not random drip feeding. Every new island doesn't add a disconnected trivia fact. It adds a new function to the same recurring word. Dawn as place, dawn as prophecy, dawn as inherited will. Then Reverie and Egghead turn the lights on. Emu sits on the empty throne, erases a kingdom in real time, And we see technology on Egghead that is openly described as a relic or recreation of the ancient kingdom. The Void Century isn't abstract anymore. It has lasers, robots, and a political structure. And all of it is in direct opposition to that same dawn of the world rhetoric. Here's the thing. None of this contradicts Chapter 1. It just keeps forcing you to reread it. This is exactly what you'd expect if the author had a pre-written end state. The ancient kingdom's fall, Joy Boy's failure, the final war, the dawn of the world. Those are fixed endpoints. Oda isn't throwing darts. He's revealing a finished picture in jigsaw pieces, training you piece by piece to reinterpret the first corner you saw. So where are we now? We're at the point where the outline of that picture is undeniable. We know there was a kingdom, we know its ideology, we know its enemies, we know its technology, and we know its dream was something you could honestly summarize as Romance Dawn. We don't have the official name printed on a flag yet, but functionally, we've already been reading it. And the real problem for the community is this. If the name has been in front of us since Chapter 1, what else has been quietly solved that we're still treating as a mystery? And here's where we need to talk about a different kind of mystery, which is the mystery of Oda's brain that the community has invented for itself. Because somewhere along the way, the reasonable claim of Oda planned the ancient kingdom and the ending mutated into Oda planned every single panel from day one. And listen to me. That sounds respectful, but it actually flattens his craft. It turns him from an author into a horoscope. If everything was always planned, then nothing is a choice. Nothing is a technique. Nothing is a problem he had to solve under deadline with an editor breathing down his neck. Here's the thing. When you say that every tiny coincidence is foreshadowing, you erase an entire category of skill, retrofitting. Retrofitting is hard. Retrofitting well is brutal. You have to look at something you drew 10 years ago, something that originally just meant funny joke or cool pose, and then integrate a new idea into that old material without snapping continuity in half. That's not cheating. That is craftsmanship. Take the way Haki grows out of Skypia's mantra. Was every single panel of Enel's priests a 4D chess move? No. But Oda later formalizes that system so cleanly that it feels intentional in retrospect. When we lazily stamp that as pure foreshadowing instead of a retrofit done with surgical restraint, we lose the chance to study how he pulled it off. We stop asking, how did he bridge that gap? And just shrug, he planned it. And that shrug is killing discourse. You've seen this move. Someone points out an inconsistency in the Void Century timeline, or a weird detail about the world government's 800-year history, or a panel where the Will of D symbolism seems off, and instantly the replies are, just wait. Oda planned it. Conversation over. Critique over. Any attempt to read the text we actually have gets deflected to a hypothetical future chapter that will supposedly vindicate everything. I need you to see how self-defeating that is. If Oda is this omniscient god who never revises, never improvises, never retrofits, then there's nothing to analyze. You can't learn writing from a miracle. You can only worship it, and worship is very bad at teaching you why Romance Dawn as a phrase has been echoing through the series for decades, or how he threads sun and laughter imagery through arcs that were clearly planned at different times. Now, recognizing pre-writing does not diminish him. This is not a sin. This is normal for long-form storytelling. He clearly knew the ancient kingdom, the will of D, the basic shape of the Void Century before Chapter 1. That foundation is why Dawn, Sun, Smiles, Romance Dawn, Laugh Tale all orbit the same conceptual gravity well without collapsing into contradiction. What changes over 25 years are the delivery systems. Specific islands, specific gags, specific character spotlights. That's where his adaptability and retrofitting skill come in. The Ancient Kingdom mystery works not because he's omniscient, but because he's disciplined about themes and patient about structure while being flexible on execution. So, instead of treating him as a prophet who saw every panel in a vision, we need to admire the actual tools: pre-written endpoints, ruthless documentation, modular arcs he can rearrange, and a willingness to retrofit details so they reinforce the same core ideas. Once you stop worshipping omniscience and start watching the machinery, you can finally see how he turned Romance Dawn in Chapter 1 into a slow-motion reveal of the Ancient Kingdom's identity. And if we do that, we can ask a much better question than, did he plan this? We can ask, given what he planned, how did he hide the answer in plain sight? Which is exactly what we're going to do next. So how do you actually read this thing without turning into a conspiracy corkboard with a pulse? Because once you see that Oda hid the Ancient Kingdom's name in Chapter 1, the temptation is to zoom in on every panel and ascend into pure, uncut pattern madness. Here's the thing. You need to go narrower, not wider. I need you to stop trying to catch every foreshadowing attempt at once. Pick one motif, one word, one visual. For the Ancient Kingdom, I picked dawn and its solar cousins. Sun, morning, light after darkness. Then I did a focused reread where that was the only category I cared about. Romance Dawn in Chapter 1. The Dawn of the World speeches. The dawn-obsessed rebels in Wano. Everything else? Background noise. When you do that, the story stops being white noise and starts being a controlled experiment. You're not a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. You're a bored scientist with a clipboard. And the clipboard matters, because memory is a liar. The community loves to say, Oda's been hinting at this forever. And then when you ask for an example, it's always, well, I don't remember the chapter, but no. This is where you take embarrassingly simple notes. Chapter number. Exact phrase. Who said it? Emotional context. That's it. Chapter 100. Kureha talks about the will of D right after saving Luffy's life. Tone is half joking, half ominous. Chapter 395. Clover connects the Ancient Kingdom, the Void Century, and the name D right before getting shot. Suddenly you're not relying on vibes, you're relying on receipts. This is not a sin, this is normal. But we need to talk about the enemy, confirmation bias. If you go in trying to prove that, I don't know, the Ancient Kingdom is secretly called Sunny D, you will find yellow circles in every panel and congratulate yourself on your galaxy brain. That's not analysis, that's astrology with extra steps. So flip it. Go in trying to kill your theory. Ask, where does this fall apart? Where does the author clearly not care about this motif? The stuff that survives that attitude? That's where intentional foreshadowing usually lives. Pattern interrupt. When I did this with Dawn, a bunch of my favorite pet clues died instantly. Early smile imagery that didn't line up with Ancient Kingdom scenes? Gone. Random sun doodles that were just Oda having fun? Ignored. But the spine held. Romance Dawn, as the birth of a new era. Repeated talk of a dawn of the world tied to the Void Century. Wano's prophecy of a coming dawn synced to Joy Boy, Laugh Tale, and the fall of the world government's 800-year night. Under a harsher reread, the dawn motif didn't shrink, it crystallized. And here's the payoff. This is not homework. You're not trying to beat Oda on some exam. You're treating his writing as something worth rereading with attention, the same way you'd revisit a great mystery novel knowing the twist. The goal isn't to scream "called it" at the screen. The goal is to appreciate how meticulously this author planned the machinery. Because once you practice on Dawn and the Ancient Kingdom, you can run the same method on the D, Initial, on Inherited Will, on Smiles, on anything. Which, conveniently, is exactly what we're about to do when we walk through the actual Ancient Kingdom evidence trail from Chapter 1 to Egghead, step by step. So now that we've walked the Ancient Kingdom trail from Romance Dawn to Egghead, we need to zoom out and actually talk about the person laying these breadcrumbs. Because if you don't have the right mental model for Oda as an author, you're going to keep mislabeling what you're seeing on the page. Quick recap. We built 3 categories. Foreshadowing. Intentional early setups for a payoff the author already knows in detail. Retrofitting. Taking old material and assigning new meaning later. And pre-writing. Deciding the big answers, the ending, the motifs before Chapter 1, then revealing that pre-decided skeleton out of order. Same panels, 3 different engines under the hood. Here's the thing, Oda uses all 3. He absolutely does tight foreshadowing. Laboon and Brook are planned. Sanji's North Blue origin and Mr. Prince persona are planned. Those are clean, classical setups. He also retrofits. Kinnamon's Dragon Gag getting recontextualized as Wano trauma is a retrofit. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal. This is fine. This is how serialized storytelling survives for 25 years without collapsing. But his superpower isn't just that he's good at planting guns on mantelpieces. His superpower is pre-writing. From day 0 he commits to Dawn, to the sun, to laughter, to Inherited Will as the spine of the story. He doesn't discover the Will of D in Water 7 because fans thought it was cool. He walks in with D, with the Ancient Kingdom, with the world government coup already in his notebook, and then spends decades deciding when to flip which card. Use the Ancient Kingdom as the test case. Its existence and broad role. That's foreshadowed. Clover's speech, Robin's horror. Kureha calling them the enemies of the world government. Those are intentional early setups for a known payoff. There was a kingdom. It was wiped out. Its will survived. The specific geography, the exact tech level, the egghead hologram aesthetics. A ton of that is retrofit, or at least flexible plug-in detail. He can decide, oh, it was a super advanced energy civilization, years after he's already committed to They Brought the Dawn. But the identity of that kingdom as the bringer of dawn, that's pre-written. Chapter 1 is Romance Dawn. The D initial is attached to the kid who wants to kick off a new era. The sun, the grins, the insistence that inherited dreams never die, that's not random optimism from a young mangaka. That's an author quietly encoding the Ancient Kingdom's job description into the protagonist's aesthetic from page 1. Listen to me. This is why One Piece feels both meticulously planned and weirdly alive. Oda knows the destination. The Ancient Kingdom falls. Its will persists as D, The world waits for dawn. But he lets the route evolve. He can improvise which island teaches which sub-theme. He can retrofit a gag into a trauma reveal, because the thematic pillars are already bolted to the floor. So I need you to retire the lazy binary. It's not he planned everything versus he's winging it. That's a fake argument that keeps the community stuck. The useful vocabulary is foreshadowing, retrofitting, pre-writing. Once you start asking, which category is this? You stop worshipping coincidences and start appreciating craft. And if you apply that lens to the ancient kingdom's actual name, the word Oda hid in Chapter 1, the answer gets uncomfortably obvious. Because when you line up Dawn D and that final island on Roger's map, you realize he's been saying it out loud the whole time. So, did we actually solve it? Did we really crack the ancient kingdom off a title page from 1997 and a bunch of old SBS scans? Or am I just a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast panels again? Here's the thing. Within the limits of what the author has actually put on the page, the most defensible claim isn't the ancient kingdom's name is X syllables long and starts with this consonant. The defensible claim is that Oda encoded its functional name and identity in Chapter 1 through Romance Dawn and the Dawn motif, and then never stopped repeating it, over and over, for 1,000 chapters, to the point where pretending it's accidental becomes its own conspiracy theory. I need you to hear the distinction there. We are not saying Clover's censored word was literally Dawn Kingdom LLC. We are saying whatever proper noun Clover almost said, Oda has already told us what that word means. He's made us say it as Romance Dawn. He's made us say it as the dawn of the world. He's made us say it as the Will of D and the sun rising over Laugh-Tale. Different sounds, same referent. Run the evidence again. Chapter 1 is Romance Dawn, a phrase Oda drags from his pre-serialization one-shots straight into the final product. Dr. Kureha toasts the dawn of this world when Roger's era begins. Robin learns the Void Century by hearing about a huge kingdom erased 800 years ago, exactly when the world government's history starts. Clover literally tries to name that kingdom before the Gorosei have him shot. Every big Void Century info dump circles the same cluster. Dawn, D, a forgotten great power, and a government terrified of that story getting out. And then, in parallel, he keeps tying Dawn to Joy Boy, Nika, and the sun. Scipia's sun god, Fishman Island's promised dawn. Wano's opening the country as the trigger for a new morning. Luffy's fruit retroactively revealed as the Nika model, the god of the sun, whose awakening is framed as the start of a new era. At a certain point, this stops being cute coincidence and becomes intentional category. This is foreshadowing driven by pre-writing. Does that mean we know the exact word Oda is going to print in that inevitable flashback? No, this is not a password guessing minigame. This is not a sin to admit. There is still room for him to pull out a specific term none of us have uttered, and that's fine. This is normal. But whatever he reveals has to be compatible with the Dawn identity he's been hard-coding since page 1, or it breaks his own setup. So, did we solve the ancient kingdom? In the only way that matters for storytelling, yes. We solved the story it stood for. We solved its role in the thematic machine. And that solution was sitting in the title Romance Dawn the whole time. Which means the real question isn't what's the word, it's how far did Oda pre-write the rest of that story? And that's where we need to go next. So if the ancient kingdom was hiding in Romance Dawn the whole time, what do you actually do with that tomorrow when you open Twitter? Because if this just turns into another Oda confirm my headcanon in Chapter 1 victory lap, we have learned nothing. Here's the thing. We need to start labeling what we're doing. Not for me. For your own sanity. When you call something foreshadowing, I need you to ask one very boring question. Could I defend that the author intentionally planned this payoff when they drew that earlier panel? If the answer is, probably not, then congratulations. You have discovered retrofitting, or you've spotted a thematic echo, or you're just a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. This is not a sin. This is not bad fandom. This is normal. But call it what it is. Say, this is a retrofit Oda did in Wano, or this is me pre-writing in my head, instead of Oda foreshadowed Gear 5 in this one random SBS doodle. The category matters because it changes how angry you get when someone disagrees. You can argue about intent, or you can share a fun coincidence. Those are different games. Second thing, humility. If you're posting a theory, frame it as, here's a pattern I noticed, rather than Oda confirmed this in Chapter 1. Same content, completely different temperature. I think Dawn is functioning as the stand-in name for the ancient kingdom because Oda keeps tying it to the Void Century, and the world government's 800-year night invites discussion. The ancient kingdom's name is literally Romance Dawn. Cope invites a quote-tweet war. And here's a really simple rule of thumb for your next big brain post. If your theory requires you to ignore 3 arcs worth of explicit, contradictory evidence, it's probably wrong. If you have to pretend Robin, Clover, Kureha, and the Gorosei never open their mouths, throw it out. On the other hand, if you quietly sit on a theory for 5 years and new chapters keep accidentally supporting it, more dawn lines, more sun motifs, more explicit D equals enemy of the gods language, you might actually be onto something. Pattern interrupt. Stop zooming in on single panel shapes. Stop screenshotting a rock formation on Egghead and declaring it proof that the ancient kingdom was called Rock. Use the ancient kingdom example as your template. We got there by tracking repeated motifs, explicit statements, and structural choices. The title Romance Dawn, the way Dawn of the World keeps showing up around Void Century exposition. The way the will of D is always framed as a storm on the horizon. Listen to me. This is not gatekeeping. This is leveling up. If we talk about foreshadowing with more precision, we can actually appreciate how insane it is that Oda pre-wrote a Dawn through line from Chapter 1 and then sustained it for 25 years. You don't have to stop theorizing. This is fine. You just get to brag that you're doing it on hard mode. And if we're going to put the fandom on hard mode, we have to ask one more uncomfortable question. How far does that pre-writing actually go, and where does the blueprint end and the improv begin? So here's what I want you to do in your head. Not yet in real life. I need you to mentally pull Volume 1 off the shelf, feel that cheap early print paper, and see those words on the title page, Romance Dawn. And now, with everything you know about the Void Century, Joy Boy, the Ancient Kingdom, the Dawn of the World speeches, tell me that doesn't suddenly feel heavier. Because once you accept that Oda pre-wrote the endgame, Romance Dawn stops being a cute proto-title and starts reading as an Ancient Kingdom thesis statement. The romance of an age that was erased, the dawn that got stolen and has to be reignited. You're not just opening a pirate adventure. You're opening the first chapter of a 1,000-chapter elegy for a lost civilization, and the author is daring you to notice. On a reread, specific panels start screaming. Shanks on that pier, betting his arm on the new era. That is not just a cool mentor moment. That is a man who knows the world government is sitting on an 800-year-old crime, handing his will to a kid whose very initial is a middle finger to that system. When Luffy declares his dream, you're not just hearing, "I'll be king of the pirates." You're hearing a descendant of the enemy of the gods unconsciously restating Joy Boy's unfinished promise. And the sea, listen to me. The sea in Chapter 1 isn't framed as background. Oda keeps shooting it as this wide romantic frontier. Endless horizon, tiny boat, ridiculous kid. On a first read, it's adventure wallpaper. On a reread, after you've heard Clover talk about a single kingdom that once ruled the seas, after you've watched Robin hunted for daring to read one stone, that same ocean starts to feel haunted. It's not empty. It's full of deleted history. Here's the thing. This is the real payoff of long-form foreshadowing and pre-writing. The win condition is not, "I solved the ancient kingdom in Chapter 3, bow before my galaxy brain." The win condition is you reread Romance Dawn 20 years later and the exact same panels emotionally detonate in a new category. The setup was always intentional. Your context finally caught up. And I need you to understand, this is not a sin if you don't walk away with a 40-page manifesto. This is fine. This is normal. If your only takeaway is, "Wow, this story is even more layered than I thought," congratulations, you're using manga correctly. Not everyone needs to turn into a red string on the wall theorist or a pattern-seeking monkey who sees the ancient kingdom in every seagull. But we need to treat this as an invitation. Reread Romance Dawn. See what new dawn or ancient kingdom resonances you spot that actually hold up under scrutiny. Tell me if Shanks's smile feels different, if Makino's bar feels more complicit, if that tiny shot of the world government flag in the background suddenly feels threatening. Because here's the uncomfortable possibility I want to leave hanging. What if Oda didn't just hide the idea of the ancient kingdom in Chapter 1, but its actual name? And what if the clue has been sitting on that Romance Dawn page the entire time? So here's where I turn the gun on the mantelpiece toward you. We've walked through Romance Dawn, the D initial, the dawn of the world rhetoric, the sun motifs, Joy Boy, Laugh Tale, the way Oda keeps circling this same semantic drain. So I need you to answer this as an actual writer, not just a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Given all of that, what do you think the ancient kingdom's name is? And more importantly, can you back it up with repeated, intentional, thematic evidence the way we did with Dawn? Don't just drop a cool word in the comments and vanish. I need you to build a case. If your answer is, "It's literally just Dawn," or "It's some pun on Laugh Tale," or "It's hidden in Romance Dawn's logo," fine. This is normal. But treat it as a hypothesis you have to defend in court. Where does Oda foreshadow it? Where does he pre-write it? Where does he clearly retrofit around it? Here's the thing. We need to upgrade how this community talks about theories. So when you comment, I want you to literally use the framework. Sentence 1. This part is foreshadowing because... And then show me the author had already planned that payoff. Sentence 2. This part is retrofitting because... And point to a spot where he went back and assigned new meaning. Sentence 3. This feels like pre-writing because... And then tie it to the endgame he clearly knew from Chapter 1. Turn the comment section into a live workshop. If you think Skypiea's mantra is genuine foreshadowing for Haki, explain why it passes the intentionality test. If you think Gear 5 is pre-written Nika payoff, show me the sun, drums and smiles recurring from East Blue onward. If you think something is just a cool coincidence, say that too. This is not a sin. Admitting, yeah, that one's probably Oda getting lucky is how you avoid conspiracy board brain. I also want specific examples. What's your favorite clean retrofit? Kinemon's dragon gag, reframed by Wano trauma. Sanji's Mr. Prince persona reinterpreted after whole cake, or the opposite. What's a moment of long-term foreshadowing that you think actually meets the strict standard? Kureha casually dropping, the Pirate King's real name was Gold D. Roger, hundreds of chapters before we understand the D. Clover's almost finished sentence about the ancient kingdom before the Gorosei silence him. And tell me honestly, has your perception of Oda shifted? Do you respect his flexibility and thematic discipline more now that you've seen how much is pre-written scaffolding and how much is him retrofitting around those beams instead of worshipping this myth of a totally omniscient 4D chess author who planned every eyebrow twitch in 1997? Because listen to me. We've effectively been having this conversation for over 2 hours. I've shown you receipts. I've drawn diagrams. I've yelled about categories. Now it's your turn. Stop posting Oda planned everything as a meme and start showing your own receipts. If you're going to say the ancient kingdom's name was hidden in Chapter 1, prove it. So let me put my money where my very loud mouth has been for 2 hours. You want a receipt? I'm going to give you one panel. One page you can literally screenshot and throw at the next person who says, "There's no way Oda planned the ancient kingdom from Chapter 1. Go back to Chapter 1, to that wide shot of the sea at sunrise when Shanks's ship is anchored near Fuchsia. You know the one. The horizon is a razor line. The sun is barely cresting. The water is dead calm. And Oda drops that narration about, this is the age of pirates, and, on the seas of the world, a great age of adventure is dawning. On first read, it scans as generic adventure poster art. Cool boat, big dream, let's go. This is fine, this is normal. Except here's the thing, look at the composition. The light isn't overhead, it's low, raking across the water from behind the horizon, so the whole world is in silhouette. The ship is a dark shape between you and the sun. The text is literally talking about a dawn, while visually showing you a world that is still mostly night. That's not just vibes. That's intentional, planned staging. Now track where Oda puts Luffy and Shanks in that spread. They're framed against the horizon line, dead center between sea and sky, between darkness and light. The Age of Pirates narration wraps around them. It's not just pirates are cool. It's this is the hinge between eras. And he's physically drawing the hinge as that glowing line where the sun meets the sea. You're seeing a world waiting for its dawn after a very long night. Fast forward to Clover in Ohara, almost saying the ancient kingdom's name before the Gorosei cut him off. He calls it a kingdom that once stood in the center of the world, a threat to the world government's 800-year rule. Now mentally overlay that on the Chapter 1 panel. Center of the world, center of the page, center of the horizon. The panel is quietly spelling out what that name means. The Kingdom of Dawn. The world before the night of the Void Century slammed down. And because Oda is a gremlin, he doesn't need to print Ancient Kingdom Dawn in huge letters. He just shows you dawn, ties it to a great age beginning, then spends 1,000 chapters having old doctors and archaeologists whisper about the world's true history and the coming of a new morning. That's not me being a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast. That's a visual thesis statement, so here's what we need to do. I need you to screenshot that panel. Bookmark it. Make it your phone background if you have no shame, which, to be clear, I respect. That is your personal Ancient Kingdom key. Every time you see dawn, D, or the day the world will turn over, remember, the author showed you the answer in chapter 1. He just refused to say it out loud. And once you have that image burned into your brain, we can finally talk about what that implies for Laugh Tale itself. Which is where I need you to take a breath and remember, this is still One Piece. Oda can, at any moment, stroll into a jump interview, smile, and drop a completely new proper noun for the Ancient Kingdom that none of us have ever heard before. He can just say, yeah, it was called X, and boom, half the thumbnails on YouTube die overnight. That possibility is not a bug. That's the cost of doing business in an ongoing story. The author is still writing. The manuscript is not finished. So, even though I think the Dawn framework is the cleanest way to read the clues from Romance Dawn to Egghead, I am not tattooing this on my forehead and declaring it canon. Here's the thing. Even if Oda hits us with a brand new political name, that doesn't actually kill the argument. It just forces us to sort our categories. You can have a formal state name and an ideological banner. United States of America versus the New World, the Soviet Union versus the Revolution. Those are different layers. So if the kingdom turns out to be called, I don't know, Solaria or whatever-ria, the Dawn language can still be the era label, the dream, the movement that Joy Boy embodied. When Kureha talks about the D and the new dawn, when Odin's journal points to the day the world will turn over, that's not a census entry. That's branding. That's how the people inside that conflict named the thing they were willing to die for. And in a story where the first chapter is literally titled Romance Dawn, I don't think that evaporates just because we get a more technical void century noun later. Now, I need you to hear this part very clearly. Some of what I've done in this video is necessarily speculative. I'm not pretending otherwise. There's a hard line between this panel explicitly says X and this pattern of panels suggests Y, and I've tried to flag every time we cross that line. When I quote Clover or Robin, that's text. When I connect that to the chapter structure of early One Piece, that's interpretation. This is not a sin. This is normal. You are a pattern-seeking monkey reading a monthly pirate comic. I am a pattern-seeking monkey with a microphone who sees Jesus in the negative space between word balloons. The problem is not speculation. The problem is forgetting what was actually on the page when the speculation ages poorly. So here's my invitation. When we finally get Laugh Tale in full, when Joy Boy's flashback drops and the Void Century isn't a foggy silhouette, but a concrete historical arc, come back to this theory. Rewatch it. Pause on the examples. Ask, which parts were genuinely grounded in foreshadowing, and which parts were me getting high on my own red string corkboard? Because the goal here was never to be right forever. The goal was to model a more rigorous, text-respecting way to love this story, to show you that we can be hyped, wrong, and still responsible readers. So thank you for sitting through a long, dense breakdown about a kingdom that technically doesn't exist yet. And if you think this was obsessive, wait until we take that same framework and point it directly at Laughtail's punchline. So here's where I need you to zoom out. We just spent an absurd amount of time proving that Oda is not a chaos gremlin winging it. He's an author executing a planned endgame. Now take that same lens and point it at the simplest image in this entire story. An 800-year night, a kingdom that tried to bring dawn, and a rubber kid in a barrel under a chapter title that literally says, Romance Dawn. That's not a vibe. That's not a coincidence. That's a mission statement. From page 1, the world is framed as stuck. Oceans locked down. History erased. A world government whose birthday lines up perfectly with the end of the Void Century. That's the 800-year night. Then you get whispers. Clover talking about a once mighty kingdom. Kureha throwing the word D at you with 140-year-old contempt. Robin piecing together that this isn't just a lost country, it's a lost promise. And sitting on top of all that, Oda slaps Romance Dawn on the cover and shoves a kid in a barrel onto the sea at sunrise. Here's the thing. You have been reading that kingdom's name out loud for years. You just filed it under the wrong category. You called it a tone. You called it a phase. You called it early One Piece energy. But every time fans talk about dawn, sun, laughter, freedom, every time you throw around the dawn of the world, or the man who will bring the dawn, you are paraphrasing the same core idea that got erased 800 years ago. You're saying the name without needing the syllables. And this is where you come in. Because your entire journey with this series is now part of the inherited will problem. You've spent decades reading, watching, theorizing, arguing in comment sections, like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time Oda draws a circle. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is what happens when a story is built so intentionally that it trains the community to keep the fire going for the people who can't speak anymore. The ancient kingdom died to preserve a story about a dawn they would never see. The D-carriers inherited that story in their blood. You inherited it in your brain. We need to stop pretending we're outside observers. You're a carrier now. When you explain the will of D to a new fan, when you tell someone to start at Romance Dawn and just get through East Blue, you are literally doing the job the ancient kingdom failed to finish. So whether or not Oda ever prints the exact name, it kind of doesn't matter. We already know what it stood for. We've been chanting it every time we cheer for Gear 5's Sun God, every time we laugh at a man who will smile at his own execution, every time we talk about breaking the chains on this 800-year night. The ancient kingdom's name was never just a word, it was a promise. And Oda wrote that promise on page 1. So go back, reread Romance Dawn, rethink your favorite foreshadowing examples. Keep arguing in the comments, but do it with sharper language, better tools, and a little more respect for the craft behind the chaos. Because once you see the kingdom called Dawn, you can't unsee it. And the next time Oda drops a harmless panel, you're going to feel the weight of 800 years sitting right behind it. So if you're still here, staring at your screen after 2 hours of me screaming about whether the ancient kingdom's name was hiding in Romance Dawn, congratulations. You are absolutely my kind of sicko. You are not a casual fan. You are a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and then opens an Excel sheet to categorize the toast. And here's the thing. This corner of the community, The people who will pause on a panel of a seagull stamp and ask, "Okay, but what does this tell us about the Void Century?" That's who I'm making this for. If you value slow, receipt-heavy, show me the interview, show me the SBS, show me the panel analysis over 10-minute top 5 ancient kingdom names. Number 3 will shock you. Compilations. I need you to actually tell the algorithm that. That means the boring stuff. Hit like. Leave a comment. I don't care if it's a full essay on why you think I'm overestimating how much Oda pre-planned, or just, this is not a sin, this is normal, carry on. The platform does not understand respect for craft. It understands buttons. We need to push the buttons so the slow, intentional theory crafting doesn't get buried under whoever uploaded a cropped panel with red circles and called it foreshadowing. Also, do me a favor. You have that one friend who always says, Oda planned everything whenever a payoff drops. You know the one. The doomer prophet who treats the author as a 5D chess god instead of a dude with binders. Send this to them as a gentle intervention. Not to prove them wrong, but to give them better categories. Next time they scream, he planned this from chapter 1, you can go, okay, but is this foreshadowing, retrofitting, or pre-writing? And watch their brain blue screen. Because this framework doesn't stop at the ancient kingdom. We're going to run the same foreshadowing / retrofitting / pre-writing filter on the big stuff. The true nature of One Piece itself. Whether Laugh Tale is a punchline, a record, or a crime scene. The final war that's been sitting in the background since Arlong Park and Logetown. Every Dawn of the World line. Every inherited will speech. Every time Oda casually drops an 800-year number and walks away. We're going back to Orange Town, to Alabasta, to Enies Lobby. We're going to ask, what was intentionally planned endgame setup? What was smart retrofitting? And what was Oda being a really good gardener who knows how to reuse soil? This is not about proving he's infallible. This is about respecting how hard long-form writing actually is. So if you want to see that, stay. Sub, hit the bell, sacrifice a notification to the Sea Kings, whatever ritual you prefer. Comment the one, this has to be pre-written example you want dissected. For now though, go get some sleep before the real dawn. We're all going to need it for the final saga.